Welcome back to a tender journey that we embark on together, as if tonight opens a secret door that leads you to the quietest depths of the soul. In this moment, you are invited to enter a soft space where time seems to stop, where thin waves of ancient tranquility gently spread through each breath. This is a journey created to help you let go of all the stress that remains in the day, so that you can find clarity in the midst of silence, so that your body and mind dissolve into the deepest state of regenerative rest. Tonight, I bring you carefully selected Zen stories, pieces of wisdom distilled through generations, from traditions that have long understood the true nature of spiritual freedom and emotional stability. Each story is not just a narrative, but also a transformative key that can change the entire way you look at distractions, pressures, flowing thoughts, and the invisible pulls of the world around you. These are not just stories told for easy listening. They are living lessons that have been preserved from generation to generation by people who have truly touched the art of inner peace. These masters understand that serenity does not come from trying to shape circumstances, but from how we adjust our own perceptions to see the world in new light. As the ancient teaching whispers, tranquility is the highest achievement of oneself. As you go through this journey together, you'll discover how profoundly these timeless truths can reshape your inner world. As the sound of the stories begins to spread softly, you will feel something gradually opening up within you. The squeezing force of everyday preoccupations softens. The constant streams of thoughts become settled, and you find yourself touching a gentle yet peaceful state of understanding. Let your body relax a little more so that your own weight is supported by whatever is holding you back right now. Take a conscious breath, and as you exhale, know that you are about to enter the flow of knowledge that has been waiting for you through the centuries. We open with a story of wisdom that lies in the midst of words that are never spoken. This is the story of the silent monk's revelation. On a peaceful mountain range, where the morning dew was like a thin blanket over old pine trees, where the sound of the wind intertwined with the sound of chanting in the distance, Master Sengai lived with a young monk known for his special vows. For 7 years, the monk chose to remain absolutely silent, believing that every word was a wall that blocked the path to enlightenment. Day after day, his figure floated quietly in the middle of the monastery grounds like a calm stream of water, sweeping the yard, tending to the garden, sitting in meditation, working with patience without a sound. Other monks were accustomed to the way he communicated with branches, eyes, and gestures. His devotion was not only obvious, but almost absolute. He believed that every word not uttered was a step closer to the truth, that silence was the purification of the soul. Until a sunny golden afternoon, when the sun shone on the temple roof through the smooth wooden beams, a wealthy merchant came to the gates of the monastery. His car was loaded with sacks of rice, a generous offering to support the monks as winter approached. With pride mixed with a little eagerness to show off his generosity, the merchant insisted on carrying the heaviest sacks into the hall himself. And in that effort, the inevitable happened. A large sack of rice slipped from his hand, fell hard to the rocky floor, shattered, and the rice spilled like a fine white rain. Thousands of rice grains were scattered on the clean pagoda floor, as if an out-of-season snowfall had just passed. The merchant's face was flushed with embarrassment. But at that moment, something so unexpected that it was almost surreal happened. The monk who had been silent for 7 years suddenly burst out laughing. Not a slight laugh. It was a loud, deep, joyful laugh, as if everything he had suppressed for 7 years had found its way to pour out at the same time. The whole monastery seemed to stand still. The other monks were so confused that they forgot what they were doing. The merchant was stunned. Master Sengai walked out of his room, curious by the resounding sound. The laughter continued for a long time, naturally, purely, without any repression, until the monk finally calmed down again. When all was quiet, he looked at the scattered rice grains, looked at everyone's astonished faces, and then gave a gentle smile full of serenity. In the evening, when the monastery became quieter, in the glittering light of the oil lamp, Master Sengai approached the other monk, who was attentively gathering the last grains of rice into a soft broom. He asked quietly, "What made you break your vow today? Why did that laughter rise after 7 years of silence?" The monk looked up, his eyes peaceful but deep. "Master," he said in a deep but deep voice, "today I suddenly understand that for the last 7 years I have carried on my shoulders not only silence, but also the weight of words that have never been spoken. I thought silence would bring me closer to the truth, but when I saw the rice spilling, I realized that my silence, when held for too long, is just as messy and meaningless as the pile of rice itself. Words and silence both need their rightful place." He nodded slightly towards the swept floor. "Rice to feed us, but when it's littered, it just turns into a mess. Your silence is supposed to nourish your mind, but when it is held too rigid, it becomes a prison." In that moment, I clearly saw the absurdity of my own clinging. Master Sengai listened and smiled and replied, 7 years of silence have taught me the most important thing, when to speak. The Buddha once taught, speak only lovely words. Words that don't do harm are pleasant. The core of the lesson lies in the fact that words, as well as silence, are only tools for awareness, not destinations. Why do we often believe that spiritual practice must be built with strict extremes? Meditation tells us that the ego likes absolutes, because absolutes give a sense of security and accomplishment. The monk turned silence into a kind of spiritual asset to accumulate, as if the more years of silence, the closer he got to enlightenment. But this story reiterates the middle way lesson that the Buddha discovered. No extremes lead to liberation. Not talking too much, nor being rigidly silent. It's knowing how to react appropriately to each moment. We also often set ourselves seemingly sacred rules. We must meditate for a predetermined number of minutes every day. Never get angry. Always be positive. Must remain calm at all times. But it is these rules, when they become rigid, that turn into shackles that bind their minds. Zen master Suzuki Roshi once said, "You are inherently perfect in your own way, but you can also use a little bit of improvement." The saying seems paradoxical, but it points out the soft truth between acceptance and maturity. Spiritual practice is not an attempt to maintain perfection or an image of an ideal self. Our inner life is really always a little messy. Times when we stumble, times when our ego is exposed, times when our strictness to ourselves breaks. The rice falling on the pagoda floor is the image of that moment. And sometimes it's those moments, not the successes, that are the most profound lessons. Because that's when we see clearly what we're clinging to, even if it's as noble as silence. And when we realize it, gentle liberation comes, like laughter after 7 years of silence. Tonight, as you turn your attention to your own spiritual practices, and the rules you set yourself to maintain a sense of discipline, you can quietly ask yourself if there are any places where you have inadvertently dissipated your mental energy just by trying to conform instead of cultivating the true spirit on the side in or not. Perhaps there are still points in you that cling to the idea that rigidity creates perseverance, that perfection leads to peace. And perhaps you will ask yourself one more thing. Is it possible to let go of these attachments with a smile of relief, as if that laughter were the door to freedom? Because, as the Buddha once taught, the safest and wisest path is the middle path, the path that does not lean to extremes, does not go into excessive stoicism, nor slips to indulgence. True wisdom never exists at the height of any attitude, but always lies in a flexible balance, always in motion, always sensitive to each moment, with the ability to respond fully with an open and unframed heart. The next story you're about to hear will reveal a profound truth about impermanence, one of the most important pillars of all spiritual traditions, through the image of a teacher who seems very uncertain but reminds us of the naturalness of life itself. This is the story of the broken tea bowl. In a simple temple nestled among the rolling hills, there is a Zen master who is famous throughout the region not only for his intellect, but also for his extraordinary methods, which sometimes confuse others. Among his strange habits, what puzzled his students the most was the fact that he persistently drank tea from a ceramic bowl so old that it cracked almost all over the surface. Every time he lifted the bowl, the tea dripped down to the bottom of the bowl, a small but persistent drop, forming permanent water streaks on his tabletop. That bowl was very ancient. The surface was full of cracks like spider webs, and with each passing season, the cracks were deeper, and the leakage was stronger. His students often felt confused, even a little embarrassed, especially when visitors to the temple witnessed the scene. They thought it was unsightly for a respected master to use old, leaky pottery, while in the temple cabinet there were many beautiful, intact, even luxurious bowls donated by benefactors. His senior students often pleaded and said, "Master, please let us bring you a new and more suitable tea bowl. This one obviously can't be repaired anymore." Other students also contributed, many offering their bowls, sophisticated, expensive, luxurious, with the good intention of the teacher to use the best. But each time, Master Ika just smiled gently and shook her head gently. "This bowl and I understand each other," he replied, lightly placing a cloth underneath it to catch the familiar drops of water. "Me and him have been in a relationship for a long time. How can I abandon an old friend just because it's no longer perfect?" The students were even more confused when they heard this. Some think that he is too stubborn. Some thought he was entangled in a strange attachment to the old bowl. Others wondered if the teacher was trying to teach something beyond their comprehension. That winter came with an unprecedented cold. Despite the fireplace, the cold wind crept into the hallways, forming a frost on the windows every morning. Then on a chilly morning, when Master Ika lifted the familiar bowl to sip the first tea of the day, something everyone had anticipated but never wanted to see finally happened. The bowl shattered. Years of enduring changing temperatures, old cracks become more and more brittle, and perhaps simply its natural fate is time to be completed. A small crack sounded, and immediately the crack spread, and the bowl collapsed into pieces in his hands. Hot tea spilled onto the table. Steam rose like a thin puff of smoke, and pieces of pottery fell clatteringly to the floor. The student rushed over, believing that he would be very sad when this longtime friend was lost. But what they saw was quite the opposite. Master Ika knelt down slowly, picking up each piece as if tending to an injured being. The student was confused and asked, "Teacher, what are you doing?" He lifted a curved piece of the rim of the bowl to the palm of his hand, looked at it with respect, and replied, "I am learning from my teacher." The whole group of students were confused, looking around and then at each other, because there was no one here but them. "Teacher, which teacher are you talking about?" Ika smiled, holding up the piece of the bowl to the light. "This bowl is my teacher. It has taught us many things over the years. It has never been tasked with keeping the water intact. Its real task is to show us what impermanence is. Its cracks, the drops of water that fall through the seasons, all remind us that no form is immutable, that beauty can survive even in decay, that an object can both function and it cannot work, but both states are temporary." He gently placed the fragment next to the others. "And now, when it breaks down, it teaches us what it couldn't teach when it was intact, that all forms come to an end, and it is in that end that the greatest lesson is delivered." The students watched in silence as he continued to clean up each piece of the bowl with the same appreciation as he had cherished it before. A student asked, "So are you going to fix the bowl?" The teacher laughed softly, and his laughter was like the wind. "Fix it? No need. This bowl accomplished the lesson it was supposed to teach. If we try to heal it, aren't we trying to repeat a lesson that has already been learned? Intactness once served a stage of our understanding. Now its breakdown serves a different stage." Then he reminded me of the ancient teaching. "All things that are conditioned are impermanent. Be diligent in your own journey of liberation." That story reveals a powerful truth that the greatest teachers in our lives are sometimes disguised as things we want to fix, replace, or deny. Why do we always resist the natural degradation of things? Meditation indicates that people are trained in a very deep instinct, the desire for eternal sustainability. We want love to always be stable, our bodies to be healthy, our work to always flourish, and circumstances that only change for the better and then stop there. But it is this immovable desire that causes us suffering, because it is the exact opposite of the nature of reality, where everything moves, is born, and dissolves. Ika's broken tea bowl symbolizes all the things in life that we are in a hurry to fix. A broken relationship that breaks our hearts, an aging body scares us, an unfulfilled dream disappoints us, a changing circumstance makes us disoriented. We see them as problems to be solved, rather than as lessons waiting to be realized. But impermanence does not come to punish. Impermanence is the natural mechanism by which the intellect unfolds. Each ending hides in it a lesson that the beginning cannot convey. Every loss exposes truths that we never saw when we were full. Every decline brings a clear vision that perfection obscures. Look back at the cracks in your own life. Maybe a breakup helps you understand yourself more strongly than you think. A disease that makes you know what's important. A lost career that guides you to a profession that has real meaning. The end of a friendship forces you to look at old habits that need to change. This is not a failure. These are complete cycles. The Zen master Pamala once said, "Everything that collapses is a challenge, but also a healing." The broken bowl testifies to that. Its cracking challenges the teacher's clinging. and its shattering heals the illusion that anything in the phenomenal world can last forever. The Buddha once taught, of all the footprints, the elephant's footprint is the greatest. Of all meditation, the contemplation of death is supreme. This is not dark contemplation, but a deep understanding that affirms the value of each moment. When we truly realize that things will eventually pass, we stop trying to hold on to or fix impermanence and begin to appreciate the beauty of each stage of our lives, even the ones that break or fade. Because those very moments contain lessons that perfection can never give us. Tonight, as you listen to yourself and recognize the subtle but undeniable signs of change that are happening day by day, like the way your face is stamped with time, your preferences change over the years, or an item that was once so precious that it's now so mundane that you can let go at any moment. You have mom. Can all of this be seen as a lesson rather than a loss? Life is always quietly reminding us that impermanence is not a punishment, but a liberating mode of teaching. And the question for you is, can you pick up the fragments of what is slowly falling apart in your life with the same dignity, gentleness, and gratitude that Master Ika cherishes the broken tea bowl? As the Buddha taught, everything that is formed sometimes breaks down. Accepting that is the way to bring the mind back to peace. The broken tea bowl is like a symbol that reminds us that only when we reconcile with the end can we fully grasp the lesson that each experience wants to impart. As we continue our journey to learn the wisdom of Zen Buddhism, we encounter another, strange but also profound story. The story of the backward. It was a clear autumn morning, the light sunlight touching the mossy tile roofs, when a strange monk appeared at the door of Master Basui's monastery. The gatekeeper initially thought he was looking at the wrong thing, because the person who was heading towards the gate was actually going retreat. His posture was straight, his steps were slow but not clumsy. He was carrying a small bag of luggage, and his robe gently swayed with each movement. News of the strange appearance spread quickly throughout the monastery, prompting the monks to put aside their morning work to see what the stranger was going to do. The person who walks backwards always maintains a solemn and calm appearance. He walked on the old stone slabs with a contemplation that made others curious. When he arrived at the main hall, he kept his back to the temple and said in a solemn voice to Master Basui that he would like to stay in the monastery for a short time, like a traveler looking for a path, but not in the way that ordinary people do. Master Basui, who was renowned for his generosity and ability to understand strange souls, immediately agreed. For the next 3 days, the monastery experienced a very different atmosphere. The person who walks backwards performs all activities literally, walking backwards in the yard, stepping backwards into the meditation hall, sitting and eating with his back to the table, but still putting his hands behind his back to take the bowl of rice without spilling a single grain. During meditation, he placed the chair to face the back wall instead of looking forward like the others. Even when he sleeps, he arranges the mat so that his head is facing the opposite of everyone. At first, his presence made many young monks feel funny. They guessed that he was injured, cursed, or practicing some secret technique from a distant land. But the more he observed, the more his sheer steadfastness made the air strangely still. People began to be more aware of their own direction, of whether they were moving forward, backward, or standing still. The walker walked back with incredible attention. Since he could not see behind him, his every step contained a complete presence. He listens to the wind, feels the smell of grass, guesses the location of obstacles with his sharp intuition, just like other senses are being expanded to compensate for limited vision. Perhaps it is because of that restriction that he seems to live more fully in each moment. By the morning of the third day, Master Basui's curiosity reached its limit. When he saw the backward walker leisurely crossing the field, Basui gently walked over from an angle where they could look into each other's eyes. He said that the presence of strangers was indeed a great lesson for the whole monastery, but he himself did not understand its deep meaning and wanted to be explained. The person who walked backwards stopped, still turning his back. As he spoke, the tone contained a lifetime of searching, both tired and clear. He said that he had spent 40 years rushing forward, reading sutras, meditating, seeking out masters, accumulating merit, always thinking that he was getting closer to enlightenment. But one day, during deep meditation, he realized that every step he called progress was taking him away from the present moment, where the true nature of enlightenment already exists. He realizes that he is pursuing what has always been within reach, never even leaving him. And then, to everyone's astonishment, the person who walked back slowly turned around, facing the world directly for the first time in 3 days. Looking at Master Basui with bright eyes, he said that forward or backward were just virtual concepts. Both are forms of movement in the mind, and truth is not in any direction. Then he sat down in the middle of the stone path, realizing that his journey actually ended when he stopped completely, because stillness is the door to deepest understanding. The Buddha also taught that there is nowhere to go, nothing to gain, and no one has to become. All of these are just illusions that reflect our inner desires. The profound teaching of this story shows us the futility of trying to find something that we already have by any form of effort, whether positive or negative. Why do we keep exhausting ourselves in the pursuit of enlightenment, trying to become better, more mindful, more mindful? Why are we constantly judging our level of meditation as if we were participating in an invisible competition? Why do we compare ourselves to others on the spiritual path? All of these are forms of moving forward that actually pull us away from simple presence. Conversely, trying to do nothing, abandoning all practice, or resisting every ritual on the spiritual path, like the traveler's 3 days backward, is just another kind of movement, a kind of pursuit covered with the appearance of renunciation. When you look back on your own spiritual journey, you may realize that sometimes your efforts to become mindful only add to your stress. When you make an effort to be compassionate, sometimes you are stricter with yourself. When you pursue enlightenment, sometimes you lose the ability to feel the life that is happening right in front of you. The story of the backward man reminds us that awakening is not in movement, but in stopping, not in pursuit, but in awareness. And sometimes the only thing we need to do to find the path is to stand still where we stand. Zen Master Hongpo once taught that your daily consciousness is the path, a definitive indication of the ultimate understanding of the person who knows how to walk against the habit of external seeking. From that teaching, we can look deeply into the Zen story of the fragile but extremely decisive distance between the pursuit of wisdom and the actual direct contact with wisdom. This is the story of the shadow of the master, an age-old story in monasteries, where light and darkness become living metaphors for confusion and awakening. In a quiet monastery, amidst bamboo groves whispering in the mountain wind, a young monk named Dokai begins to cultivate an unusual obsession. While fellow practitioners focused on meditating, contemplating the breath, studying the scriptures, or working mindfully, Dokai was completely fascinated by the unexpected, the shadow of Mujo Sensei. The young monk was absolutely convinced that his shadow contained a special kind of wisdom, a kind of wisdom that could not be found in ordinary teachings or in ancient scriptures. This belief grew day by day and gradually became the sole driving force behind his entire practice. Every morning, instead of sitting still to focus on his breath, posture, or inner realm, Dokai carefully chooses a spot in the meditation hall to observe how Mujo's shadow falls on the wooden floor. He watched as the length of the shadow changed with sunlight, watching it lengthen at dawn, then shorten as the sun rises, and finally disappear completely when the light reaches its peak. And during the hours of meditation in the bamboo garden, as the other monks walked mindfully step by step, feeling the contact between the feet and the ground, Dokai's entire attention was focused on the way his shadow bent around the stones, weaving through the gaps of the wooden fences, or blend in with the bamboo shadows swaying in the wind. Not only observing, he also meticulously notes in a notebook, drawing shapes and movements that he believes have deep spiritual meaning. For Dokai, every change of the shadow is a signal, a mysterious message that Mujo Sensei wants to send to him. When he taught in the evening light, most of the students listened attentively to his every word, but Dokai seemed to hear nothing at all. His eyes only followed the shadow, the way it slid on the tatami sheets, the way it blended in with or separated from the shadows of the other students, the way it seemed to be trying to reach for some object in the room. He interpreted these movements as secret teachings. The other monks, although they found Dokai's behavior strange, still thought it was harmless. But Master Mujo didn't miss anything. He realized that Dokai's attention had never really been on the present moment. It always follows the dim projection of his own body. He saw that the practice of the young student was gradually turning into a search for external things, rather than a return to fostering the awareness that exists within itself. For months, however, Mr. Mujo did not intervene. He understood that sometimes the learner has to go to the end of illusion on his own in order to enter into true understanding. He let Dokai continue to study the shadow, seeing it as a natural process for him to exhaust himself from his own mistakes. Then one day, the sky was covered with thick clouds from morning to night. The light became gray, not creating a single shadow in the entire monastery. That day, Dokai panicked. He ran everywhere, along the corridors, in the meditation hall, in the yard, into each room, looking for his shadow. But throughout the day, that familiar shadow did not appear at all. This unusual absence made him feel like he was deprived of his entire foundation of practice. During the midday lecture, Dokai sat motionless, his eyes constantly rolling around the room without a single dark spot. He felt disoriented, completely unable to calm down or receive any teachings. He began to realize, with a sense of panic, that his entire practice had become dependent on an external, fragile, and constantly changing condition. When the lecture ended, Mujo Sensei walked over and gently asked why Dokai was uneasy. Dokai confessed that he couldn't find his shadow, that the wisdom he had been studying seemed to have disappeared. He asked desperately, "Without it, how can I continue to study?" Mr. Mujo looked at him compassionately and asked, "So where is your teacher?" Dokai looked around the bright room in confusion. He said that he could not find the shadow of the teacher and did not know where to find the teachings without it. At that moment, Mr. Mujo raised his foot and stomped the floor. The sharp, reverberating sound startled Dokai to complete consciousness. At that time, he said, I spent all my time studying darkness, but I forgot the light that created it. Then he reiterated the Buddha's words, do not seek refuge other than yourself. From this story, we see an obvious truth. Wisdom cannot be found in projections, reflections, or shadows of enlightenment, but can only be realized through direct experience with existing awareness. Why are we often fascinated by the shadow of the intellect rather than the intellect itself? Zen argues that the ego is wise in turning the entire spiritual journey into a search for objects, things to analyze, possess, or accumulate. Dokai symbolizes the part of each of us that wants to turn enlightenment into a concept, a phenomenon, an object that can be observed from a distance instead of being a vivid awareness in our own experience. The shadow becomes a symbol of all the places we look for wrong, strange phenomena, peculiar sensations, complex theories, or the glory of a teacher. How many times in our own journey have we hunted for extraordinary experiences without missing the simple mystery of the present moment? How many times do we run after the knowledge of enlightenment and forget that the simple presence is the foundation of all understanding? Darkness can only exist in the presence of light. In the same way, all spiritual experiences can only appear through consciousness. But we become so absorbed in striking experiences that we forget that it is the awareness that illuminates them. We analyze the thought instead of returning to the stillness in which the thought operates. We dissect emotions instead of dwelling in open spaces that allow emotions to arise and then die. Dogen once said, to study the Dharma is to study yourself. To study yourself is to forget yourself. Dokai doesn't study itself. He studied the shadow, something completely outside. And that cloudy day is a living lesson about the impermanence of conditions. As in practice, there are times when meditation does not bring the familiar peace. The teacher is not around. Special experiences do not occur. Those moments show us what we are relying on to maintain our practice. Conditioning or awareness? When Mujo stomps his feet on the floor, the sound is an expression of direct awakening. No darkness, no paranormal images, no special signs. Just this moment, naked and full. If you look back on your own spiritual journey tonight, you may be wondering, am I studying the darkness or recognizing the light? Are there any complications that we are clinging to that we can let go of to see clearly what is always present? Because as the Buddha said, when you light a lamp for others, you also illuminate your own path. In the stillness of inner space, where all the limitations of form seem to disintegrate into an infinite platform, we touch a state of peace that is already there. That foundation does not need to be created, nor is it lost. It is only recognized when we are silent enough to see. All the experiences of life, happy, sad, exhilarating, or tired, float in a sky larger than themselves. Like clouds hovering across the sky, they appear and dissipate, but the sky has never been affected by any shape. The sky is the very foundation of existence, and each of us, when we turn inward, can recognize that pure stillness. When in that state, the subtle movements of life are unfolded like clear water flowing through a rock crevice. There is no coercion, no opposition, no desire to shape the world according to one's own wishes. We simply let things take their own way, as if we were standing next to each other, but still fully integrated. Consciousness becomes an uninterrupted flow, a light, complete witness, without factionalism, without choice. From there, the truth emerges like the light of morning that gradually spreads on the ground. Each experience comes and goes on its own. Nothing belongs to us, and nothing is separate from us. Liberation does not lie in finding something new, but in removing the walls that we have built around ourselves. When the division between the observer and the observed dissolves, everything returns to one whole. In that unity, each breath also becomes the whisper of the universe. Each feeling in the flesh is also the rhythm of heaven and earth. And when we are no longer governed by personal notions, right and wrong, gain, good and bad, we begin to see the truth of nature. Everything happens as it should. That stillness is not an emotionless emptiness. It is vibrant, full of life, and always moving like a lake reflecting the sky. Even if the wind rises and shakes the surface of the water, that clear reflective essence is always intact. When we return to our very unshakable nature, we no longer seek perfection in the external world because we see that it is all complete in our deep being. Every moment, whether ordinary or special, carries within it the sacredness of presence. And then, in that tranquility, what we call I gradually dissolves into the whole. No one is forced to shoulder expectations. No one has to fight with what's going on. Only life manifests itself through all kinds of forms, like a musical without a player, a play without a main actor. Everything is simply itself, without makeup, without hiding, without painting. When we look through the appearance of things, we see its light, a light that we have never noticed before, because our minds are always in a hurry to cling to concepts. Realizing this, the mind is no longer a wall that holds us down, but a gentle tool for presence. Thoughts still appear, but we are no longer caught up in them. They come like the sound of the wind passing through the tile roof, fleeting and then disappearing, leaving no trace. We no longer equate ourselves with old thoughts, feelings, or stories. We see that we are the space that contains everything, not the phenomena of birth and death within it. When that separation is gone, we begin to see the world with the eyes of understanding. Each person we meet carries a unique story, joys and pains that we never see. That understanding does not come from rational effort, but from a heart that has been softened by unconditional acceptance. We no longer need others to change in order for us to be at peace. Peace becomes the natural nature of our being, and from there we can embrace everything, even if they are not what we expect. In the depths of that stillness, time seems to lose its old meaning. We don't run to the future. We don't hold on to the past. Every moment becomes the convergence point of the whole life. There is no moment less important than another. Everything is happening right here and now. And in that realization, it is clear that life has never been a journey towards a destination. It is a continuous rise of the present, a circle with neither beginning nor end. When that view takes root, we are less hasty reactions. An unpleasant word no longer shakes our minds as it used to. An unexpected event no longer causes us to lose our insight. Instead, it is softness, like water creeping through a rock crevice, accepting all shapes while retaining its transparent nature. Water does not fight, does not oppose, but is capable of overcoming all obstacles with that same flexibility. Then the miracle happens. When we stop looking for change in the outside world, the world itself begins to change in a natural way. Not to change at will, but to change by the response of life itself to the full presence within us. Relationships become lighter. Challenges become open-ended lessons. Old pains lose their strength like shadows that have nowhere to cling to when light fills the room. And with each breath, we touch the truth that we are the flow of life, not separated, not alone, not left behind. We always belong to a larger whole, where everything is linked together by invisible strands of energy and presence. I don't need to hold on to anything, because nothing can really leave me. There is nothing we really own, because we are all just stopping by and then continuing its own journey. All that remains is listening. Listen to your breath. Listen to your own footsteps. Listen to the pulse of the inner and outer world. In that listening, all answers gradually appear without us having to search. Clarity does not come from the effort to reason, but from becoming empty, ready, and not resistant to whatever is present. From that emptiness, life speaks, and its words are simple. Be present. When we are truly present, there is nothing left to reach, no path to take. Every moment is complete. Every experience is an incense that elevates existence. Every step is a step on the sacred ground of the now. In that awareness, we realize that everything we have ever sought on the outside, peace, protection, wholeness, is inherently within ourselves. We cannot lose it because it is our nature. And when we see that, we walk more gently, live more deeply, love more completely. There is no more clinging past, no more vague future, only life blooming in every moment. And so stillness becomes a companion, present in everything we do. It keeps us with ourselves, reminding us that we have never left the house of presence. It is where we begin and where we return. From here, we live like a river that never stops flowing, bringing with it the tenderness and beauty of a free mind. Just like the teacher pointing to the moon, the teachings are not moonlight. The finger of direction cannot replace the night sky, and no one can drink water just by listening to others describe the sweetness of the stream. In this spirit, Bankai's gentle rejection is not a rejection, but a profound invitation, inviting the listener to enter into his own experience, instead of trying to collect bits and pieces of knowledge borrowed from others. Enlightenment, if it can be called by name, is not a gift to be delivered, but an opening in the seeker's own heart. When the messenger left the temple in confusion, he did not realize that the confusion itself was a gateway, a crack in his common sense. If he had paused longer, if he had allowed Bankai's silence to seep into himself, perhaps he would have realized that the answer he was trying to bring back to the Baron could actually only be found where neither of them wanted to look. In the absolute simplicity of the present experience itself. Truth does not settle in the words of any teacher, but in stillness before words appear. As the messenger's footsteps faded on the stone path, Bankai continued to sit quietly in the empty room, showing no signs of sadness or disappointment. For him, that meeting was completely complete. A moment is a moment. There is no need to prolong. There is no need to try to force it into anything other than itself. He sat there like clear water that did not cling to any form. And from that piece, the story of direct transmission in Zen became as clear as the morning. Centuries before Bankai's life, other Zen masters faced the same questions, the same desires, who sought with sincerity, mixed with instinctive ignorance. As always, people want to grasp the invisible with their conceptual hands. They want to store the infinite in a small bag of wisdom. But the truth cannot be reduced to that. If it could be locked up in an answer, a sermon, a text, then it would no longer be a living truth, but only a shadow of it. When we look at this story, the irony is that the Baron, although he wished for enlightenment, could not go to the teacher himself. He sends others on his behalf, as if awakening can be received by authorization, as if one could put his hand into the mind of another and take out a gift and put it in his own hand. This absurdity may seem obvious when recounted, but in everyday life, we still repeat the same behavior. We devour spiritual books in the hope that the knowledge of others will replace our own observation. We listen to the lectures in the hope that the teacher's experience will become the student's experience. We listen to the descriptions of enlightenment, but forget that enlightenment is not in the descriptions, but in the silent awareness of listening to those descriptions. The Baron's question about the nature of consciousness is a very big one, but also a wrong one. Not because it's meaningless, but because it can't be answered in language. Consciousness is not a topic of discussion, not a concept to define, nor an object that we can stand outside and observe. Consciousness is the foundation of all experience. It is what is hearing these words, feeling the body, watching the thoughts float, being alive in each moment. Talking about consciousness is like trying to describe light with darkness. Trying to grasp it with thought is like trying to hold the wind with your hands. When Bankai was silent, he not only refused to answer, but also pointed out the elusive nature of the question. Silence is the only answer that can contain consciousness, because silence is the foundation of all manifestations, sounds, images, emotions, thoughts. If the messenger could have stayed in that room, sharing the silence with the teacher, he might have sensed what no words can convey, consciousness not in the answer, but in the attention that awaits the answer. This story becomes an example for ourselves. When we meditate, we're like the Baron, always wanting to get something, a special experience, a deep feeling, a moment of radiance, a decisive understanding. But that desire is the wall that separates us from what we seek. Excessive effort is like stirring the surface of the water in the desire to see the bottom of the lake. The harder you stir, the more cloudy the water. The more I try, the more confused my mind becomes. Only when you let go, only when you no longer wish, can the water calm itself and the truth reflect in that stillness. The Buddha nature that the original passage refers to, like an immovable stone, unworn away by search or improvement, is also in that stillness. It doesn't increase when we try, nor does it decrease when we fail. It is the foundation that cannot be touched by success or failure, by weakness or strength, by obscurity or clarity. We can't make it better with practice, nor can we make it worse with mistakes. Buddha nature is simply that which is present before all notions of self. It is like a river under the ice. Even if we only see a cold and hard surface, the flow continues, never stopping. And so, what we experience in meditation is not to create Buddha nature, but to remove the clouds that obscure it. When we let go of control, we realize that the expanded space has always been there. When we stop pursuing enlightenment, we discover that there is nothing left to pursue, because everything is arising in the light of an already perfect consciousness. The search ceases not because we have achieved something, but because we see that what we seek has never left us. In Bankai's story, the inability to communicate through an intermediary also points to another truth. The spiritual journey is the path that each person must walk on his own, even with a teacher to guide him. The teacher is just the one who reminds us to look at ourselves, but the look must be made by us. No one can meditate for us. No one can feel the stillness for us. No one can experience the truth directly for us. You can knock on the door, but the one who opens it must be me. And even if the door is open, stepping through must still be our own footsteps. The true teaching in Zen always goes back to that point. The truth is nowhere else but where you stand. There is no need to wait for a more suitable time. There is no need to look for a special state of mind. There is no need to prepare a more perfect self. Even in the chaos of thought, even in the emotions that are surging, even in the frustration, doubt, fatigue, the light of awareness is still shining on these experiences. The only thing missing is your realization. If you listen closely, Master Fugu's laughter in the first paragraph comes back as a mischievous but profound soundtrack. That laughter is the laughter of the universe, when we see people busy looking for something they have never lost. It's like a parent smiling when they see a child walking around the house looking for the glasses that are on top of his head. A smile that is not disrespectful, only full of love and patience. The laughter reminds us that the search for too seriously is the drama of the ego, and we only have to look at the ego, not to resist, but to see that it is only a momentary movement in the wider consciousness. And then, if we follow the flow naturally, we can see that Bankai doesn't just teach the messenger or the baron, but all of us. Turn to yourself. Notice that every question of consciousness comes from consciousness itself. Notice that the person asking and what is being asked are not two separate entities. When we look deeply into the nature of the person who is seeking, we see that he is also just a thought, an image that appears in perception. And when that thought dissipates, only a pure, nameless, formless presence remains. Something that language cannot grasp, but which the heart recognizes immediately. If you sit still in the evening, as the opening passage suggests, you can feel it directly. In the light breath, in the calm heartbeat, in the fatigue that subsides after a long day, there is a quiet space that embraces you. It is not the stillness that you create, but the inherent stillness. You don't need to try to love, because true love flows from where no one else owns it. You don't need to try to be aware, because awareness is what precedes all effort. All it takes is to temporarily stop and open up to what is present. Meditation doesn't require you to be different. It invites you to return to what you were. And in that return, you realize what Bankai wants to remind barons, messengers, and people to seek. Enlightenment cannot be transmitted from one person to another because it is not material. It's like a fire that is lit from your own heart. No one can bring it to you, but people can show you how to light it yourself. When you see the fire burning within you, you will know that it has never been extinguished. It's just that you didn't look at it. Remember that in this journey, the teaching is not in the words, but in the silence between the words. Not in the story, but in the space between events. Not in the thought, but in the void where the thought dissipates. When you stop the river of thought, even for a moment, you will feel what Bankai lived. Truth cannot be transferred because it has never left the subject. Once you understand this, you no longer need to search. Not because you found it, but because you realize you're what you're looking for. And from that moment on, every step of life, whether washing dishes, drinking tea, listening to birds sing, or sitting in the middle of the street, becomes perfect practice. There is no moment that is not sacred. There is no place that lacks presence. There is no experience that is outside of Buddha nature. It's all there, right now. Tonight, when the night has covered the ground like a soft cloth that hangs down all our preoccupations, let's take a moment to return to the simplest fact in life: consciousness existing. The consciousness of these words is passing through your eyes. The consciousness of the body sitting at some point in space. The consciousness of the quiet background where thoughts are suddenly born and then dissolve like small waves on the surface of a black lake. And in this moment, if you are willing to be silent for a moment, you may ask yourself, am I experiencing this very realization directly, or am I just trying to understand it conceptually? The Buddha once said, "Make your own refuge." No one can take your place on the path of liberation. Not a messenger, not a philosopher, not even the holiest teachings. The path must be walked with your feet, with your breathing, with the courage to look back at what you have always been, but because you are too close to notice. And from this comes the story that meditation masters often tell about the difference between seeing and being seen, between true wisdom and the form of wisdom. It is the story of a blind man and the lantern. That day, when the sunset receded and the darkness descended like a flood, the blind man sat in his dear friend's cottage. They spent the day together, drinking tea, talking, and then settling down in the comfortable silence that only people who really knew each other could share. There is no need to say anything, no need to try to be interesting or insightful. There is only pure presence between two people. When it was late, the blind man got up, groped his cane, adjusted his thick cloak, and prepared to set out for his home. The friend looked out into the night sky, where the darkness was so thick that he couldn't distinguish which was the road, which was the bamboo grove, and which was the well. Worry was in his eyes. "Friend," he said in a gentle voice, "take this lantern with you. It was very dark tonight, and the road was not easy. Take it with you, you'll be safer." The blind man laughed, a gentle and genuine laugh. "I can't see. Light doesn't help me. My feet are used to every brick on these roads. My ears could clearly hear every step, every rustling. I don't need light to go." "Yes," replied the friend, "but the lantern is not for you to see. It lets others see him. In this thick darkness, sometimes it is the bright-eyed ones who cannot see clearly. You don't bring me lights. I bring them to you." The blind man stopped. That statement is completely reasonable. There are things we don't need, but others need us to have them if we want to avoid collisions. He accepted the lantern with gratitude. It's a beautiful lamp, a slender bamboo frame hugging the thin oil paper, inside a small candle that flashes when the friend lights it. That light, although he did not see it, he felt a slight warmth emanating from it. He knew others would see him from afar. "Thank you," he said, bowing his head. "You always understand what I don't see." And so he walked into the night, the lantern swaying rhythmically with each step, like a little star lost in the sea of darkness. The familiar path leads through many narrow passages, where earthen walls surround the sides, forming a slit as long as the throat of the night. The breeze blew lightly, bringing with it the scent of bamboo, rice, and the smell of freshly moist earth after the afternoon rain. Blind people walk at a familiar pace. He felt every slight movement of the stick as it touched the pavement. He listened to the sound of the wind through the crack of the house, the sound of water leaking from the eaves, the sound of someone's footsteps in the distance. The lantern gently swings the dried bamboo sticks together, creating a soft sound like breathing. Then suddenly, rumble! Someone stabbed him directly. The impact made him stagger and almost fall. The lantern shook violently, and he had to hurriedly hold it back so as not to fall to the ground. "Don't you see?" the blind man snapped, his voice annoyed. "I brought a lamp to avoid this." The other person was silent for a moment. Then he said, his voice full of surprise but not anger, "My friend, the candle in your lamp is out." The blind man was surprised. He reached up and touched the lantern. That's right. The candle has been extinguished for some time. From start to finish, he walks in complete darkness, but carries a lantern that he believes is on. An empty barrel, a decoration, an icon has no function. He stood there, feeling this truth seep into him. It wasn't the other person who was careless. It was he who inadvertently carried the illusion that he had light. The Buddha once said, "Thousands of candles can be lit from a single candle without shortening its life." And the story of the blind man standing in the middle of that dark road sheds light on something similar. Carrying a lantern is not carrying light. The same is true of us in our spiritual life. We read a lot of books, listen to a lot of lectures, collect good quotes, memorize them, and believe that we have wisdom. But all of that is just a lantern. If the candle of direct experience is not lit, we still walk in the dark night with a pleasant illusion that we are carrying the light. Blind people are not wrong to carry lamps. He was full of good intentions, but what he lacked was a living fire. The true meaning of the light is not in the form of the lamp, but in the candle burning within it. In Zen practice, there is a distinction between knowing and knowing directly. You may know 10,000 teachings about mindfulness, but that doesn't mean you're awake. You can talk very well about compassion, but that doesn't mean you're living in compassion. You can talk about selflessness, but still hold on to the ego like the only stick. We carry lanterns, thinking that we are illuminating, but others can see right away that the candle is out by the way we react, by the restlessness, by the pretense of peace when the inside is full of thunderstorms. Like the traveler, sometimes someone stabs us with reality, and we realize we have walked in the dark, not because of sin, not for lack of intelligence. It's just that they forgot to light it, and realize that it's not a failure. It's the best place to start. In that moment of impact, the blind man has a choice: to get angry, to blame, or to smile and realize that he has carried a useless lantern. Perhaps in that moment, he understood something more profoundly than any lecture he had ever heard. The true light is not in the things we carry, but in the fire that lives in the heart. The lamp, however beautiful, is just a vehicle. There is no fire. It is a hollow decoration. We are the same. Title in the profession does not mean true stability. Advice or not is synonymous with compassion. Talking about peace does not mean living in peace. Reading meditation books does not mean sitting in meditation. Showing enlightenment does not mean being enlightened. The blind man standing in the dark realizes that the lantern does not light up, turns out to be the best reminder that life sends. The Buddha taught, "Better than 1,000 empty words is a word that brings peace." The real fire, however small, still shines. The largest lantern, if it is turned off, is just darkness. And so that evening, the blind man did the simplest thing. He asked the traveler to give him a fire. The two stood together in the dark night. A fire was transmitted. The candle lit up again, and the warm light spread out like a sigh. "Thank you," the blind man said. "I thought I was carrying light, but it turned out to be just a shadow. The traveler smiled. We all do sometimes. The important thing is that when I know it's off, I'll turn it back on. The blind man nodded. Then he walked on, this time with the true light with him, and with an understanding he had never realized in his entire life. Light was not in form, but in its life. And perhaps with that light burning in the simple lamp, he illuminated not only the way home, but also the way back to himself. In the end, every night there are three things that cannot be hidden forever: the sun, the moon, and the truth. An unlit lantern will reveal itself when it collides with reality. But thankfully, the light can always be rekindled if we are brave enough to look into our own darkness. At the end of autumn, the wind from the north swept into the capital like a sigh of relief from the changing seasons. On the dark, tiled roofs of palaces, the pale sunlight of the afternoon spreads down in thin streaks like silk, illuminating the glittering dust of time. In the midst of that quiet space, the imperial palace seemed to be holding its breath, as if sensing that a special meeting was about to take place. The Emperor of Japan, who from birth had been enveloped in absolute authority and reverence, was walking slowly along the corridor leading to the audience room. Since childhood, he has been accustomed to the fact that every question has an answer, and every question has someone who respectfully kneels down to explain it in detail. Scholars, Taoists, advisors, all like countless lamps lighting up around him, making the darkness of the unknown seem unreachable. And that's why, when he took the initiative to arrange a private meeting with Zen Master Gudo, who was considered the most learned master in the kingdom, the court couldn't help but be in turmoil. A powerful emperor searches for a monk who lives as simple as the clouds and the wind. The two worlds were as far apart as heaven and earth, and yet today they met in the same room. The door of the audience room opened, revealing a large space that had been used for political discussions. But this afternoon, there were only two people in the room, the Emperor and Master Gudo. Sitting on the old pedestal, the Zen master looked like a natural part of the room, like a stone lying still in a meditation garden, not wearing any of the dignified appearances, but making the silence so deep that one had to lower one's voice when entering. The Emperor sat down opposite him, and after a few breaths, he let his curiosity speak first. I have a question that has puzzled many of the great minds of history. Even the most talented Taoists in the court can't satisfy me. So we want to hear from the person himself who is considered enlightened. Gudo looked at the monarch not with the eyes of a subordinate, nor with the eyes of a master full of spiritual power. That look was simple. It is the eyes of a human being who is listening, completely present in this moment. The emperor continued, his voice lowered. What happens to an enlightened person after death? The question echoed in the large room, bouncing against the polished wooden walls and dissolving into the air, like a bell that was not struck hard but rang for a long time. The emperor was prepared to hear an eloquent lecture on the nature of consciousness after death, about the subtle realms, about the dissolution of the self into the great self, or about the eternity of pure awareness. He expects a clear solution, a map that leads to the ultimate path that everyone will eventually have to enter. Gudo, on the other hand, only replied in a gentle voice, softer than the sound of the wind passing through the bamboo orchard. How should I know? The emperor involuntarily sat up straight. His face flashed with astonishment. The astonishment of a man who had heard long answers all his life, now suddenly met with an answer as empty as the sky. But he is an enlightened being, the emperor said, a little doubtful. Aren't people like you who understand things that are beyond the scope of ordinary people? Gudo smiled, not the smile of the one who had the secret answer, but the smile of the one who knew that the truth did not lie in any solution. Your Majesty, that's right. But I'm not a dead person. The sentence is uttered so softly that the listener does not know how to react. It does not carry a challenge, nor is it the kind of mysterious metaphorical answer that intellectuals often use. Just the simplest truth. He never died, so he didn't know. But it is that simplicity that makes the room deep. It was as if everything the emperor had ever believed about knowledge, about knowing, understanding, having answers, was suddenly shattered by a sentence as light as dust. The emperor was silent for a long time. In that silence, the sound of dry leaves outside falling on the yard is a hint. Life is always changing, and human understanding, no matter how vast it is just like a leaf in the middle of an endless forest. Finally, Gudo continued. People often think that enlightenment is like opening a treasure trove of countless answers about the universe. But in reality, enlightenment is just seeing clearly what is happening in this very moment. It is not to know all things beyond experience, but to no longer be bound by the need to know everything. He put his hands on his knees and looked down at the ground as if he were looking directly at the ground. We are easily tempted by conceptual intelligence, which builds on reasoning and wishing. But true understanding is not based on guesswork. If something isn't in my direct experience, I'm not going to make up a solution to it. That is the only honesty I can give him. The emperor felt something strange in his heart, a feeling of disappointment, relief, and confusion, like a child taught that the fairy tales he once believed were only shadows. But don't people expect from Zen masters explanations about death, about the soul, about continuity? He asked. They're expecting, yes, Gudo replied, but that's not the focus of meditation. An enlightened person knows about life because they live fully in every breath. But death is still a door that only opens once in a lifetime. Before entering there, no one could say they knew. A breeze blew into the room, slightly shaking the candle on the table. The light cast Gudo's shadow on the wooden floor, but the shadow was light and soft, as if it wasn't attached to his body. The emperor looked at the shadow and thought, yes, perhaps we are too used to trying to grasp the shadow of what has not yet happened. Gudo continued, his voice recounting something that had been in the human heart for thousands of years. The Buddha once taught that we should not believe just because we hear about it, just because of tradition, just because we are told by someone in authority. What goes beyond direct experience? Let them be left in mystery. Trying to find the answer to the unknown only makes the mind more confused. The emperor exhaled, as if pouring out something that he himself did not know he was carrying. He thought of the years of his reign, where he always had to appear to know everything, the destiny of the country, the heart, the divine will. But now, in front of him was a man who dared to say, I don't know, without losing his dignity. Is it? The emperor asked slowly, admitting that he didn't know was a form of wisdom. Gudo bowed his head slightly. That is the foundation of all wisdom. When the mind is not bound by false certainty, it becomes as bright as the surface of a still lake. It is in ignorance that we open up the space to experience life without judgment. He looked directly into the emperor's eyes. Not knowing is not lacking. It's openness. The emperor heard it and felt an invisible rope in his heart break. For so long, he did not allow himself to be ignorant, not before his subjects, not in front of his courtiers, not even before himself. But as it turns out, the honesty of not knowing can be as light as a petal falling in the wind. Master, he said, if even death doesn't need an answer, then what is the most important thing in this life? Gudo closed his eyes for a moment, as if listening not to the question, but to the breath touching the tip of his nose. The most important thing is to live fully before death. We can't know what happens behind the last door, but we can embrace each moment before entering it. And when living deep enough, death is no longer a terrifying mystery. It's just part of the flow. He opened his eyes and looked at the gentle emperor. He doesn't need to know all the answers. He just needs to be fully present in everything he is doing. As if he is living, as breathing, as if he is talking to me right now. At that time, the unknown is no longer an enemy, but a vast sky where life is free to fly. The emperor bowed his head. For the first time in many years, he bowed not out of ceremony, but out of genuine respect. The meeting ended, and Gudo left like a golden leaf in the autumn wind, so light that it did not leave footprints on the carpet. The emperor remained in the room, sitting quietly, looking at the void where the Zen master had just sit. But the void is not cold. It was like a flat lake, illuminating the shadow of what he had never dared to face, himself. The afternoon falls slowly. The shadow of the sunset is tinged with red. When the servant came in to light the lamp, the emperor said only one sentence. Today, I met a person I don't know. And because of that, he knows more than anything else. That evening, as he stood in front of the window looking at the moon rising, the emperor suddenly remembered Gudo's words. I don't know how to be open. And he found his heart really open, as if a heavy part of his heart had just been removed. From then on, whenever faced with unanswered questions about the future, about the human heart, about the universe, the emperor no longer tried to find answers at all costs. Instead, he let them drift away like clouds across the sky. And sometimes in the quietest of nights, he heard Gudo's voice echoing in his heart, as light as the sound of bamboo touching the wind. How should I know? But this time, instead of being confused, the emperor smiled. Because he understands that there are the most beautiful, the deepest, and the most true, can only be lived, not known. In the peaceful garden of the monastery, where the cherry blossoms fall gently like the early snow of the season, the sky gradually turns to twilight, dyed purple and yellow gently throughout the space. A young student comes to his master's side. Master was sitting under the canopy of an old maple tree, his gaze fixed on the evening sky, as if drawing the subtle shades of the sunset in his mind. The space is quiet and peaceful, with only the slight rustling of leaves and the steady breathing of two people sitting close to each other in a moment of meditation. The student, after years of diligent practice under the guidance of a master, now carries in his heart profound questions that the official lessons cannot answer. He hesitated, summoning all the courage to voice the insecurity in his heart. Master, he began, his voice deep. When I was young, I always longed to make my family and loved ones proud of me. I want to excel. I want to achieve achievements so that they will please me and look at me with respectful eyes. Have you ever been like that? Master looked at the student with gentle and deep eyes and saw in it a burning desire that had driven him on the path of study. He nodded and said softly, Yes, I used to be like that too. That simple acknowledgement makes students feel relieved, as if they can see a true part of themselves in the teacher's eyes. But then he wondered, why do you crave that pride so strongly? What really drives that demand? Master smiled, tenderness evident in every line of his face. I want them to have more reasons to love and accept me, he said slowly. If I can make them proud, maybe their love will be safe, abundant, and I won't have to be afraid. The student sat silently, listening to every word like dew on the leaves in the morning dew. Master continued, his voice seemingly in harmony with the gentle sound of the wind through the foliage. But the deeper reason is that I am desperately seeking that love, because without that approval, I wouldn't feel worthy to love myself. He paused, looking up at the first stars that appeared as the sky grew darker. I sought permission from others to be satisfied with myself. That approval, to me, is proof of my own worthiness. In a quiet moment, the master's eyes were like the light of a lantern, illuminating a deep, hidden corner of the human soul. Then, one day, he awoke with a revolutionary realization. I realized that I could ask myself another question, he said, his voice deep. What if we could ignore all external confirmation and just learn to love and accept ourselves unconditionally? What if we don't need any approval from others to feel fully about our existence? The student felt a new energy radiating in his heart when he heard those words. He imagined a state of happiness that was independent of external circumstances, not bound by the approval or rejection of others. Does that mean that a sense of self-worth can be constant, like your own heartbeat, unshaken by the changing of the world? He asks, hopefully. Master nodded. Exactly. That's where the real spiritual journey begins. Not by finding something outside of yourself, but by discovering what is complete within. He looked at the student, his eyes imbued with sincerity and peace. After a moment of deep silence, the student asked, so you no longer crave the pride of others? Is it completely gone? Master smiled gently, like someone who has experienced the ups and downs of the ocean and still maintains a peaceful mind. Oh no, my ego still has those desires. Habits and patterns from the past do not disappear overnight, but what has changed is our relationship with them. I am no longer completely identified with that self as before. He pointed to the dark garden where fireflies had begun to flicker and dance in the dim space. We learn to see these approval-seeking thoughts as these fireflies. They come and go, fleeting, and then disappear. I observe them with care and compassion, but no longer let them determine my worth. The student was surprised. So you still care about what others think? He replied in a gentle but deep voice, I respect their opinions, but I no longer let them be too heavy. The approval of others becomes like the weather, sometimes calm, sometimes stormy, but it does not determine the peace of our minds. The master's face radiated a silent joy, a joy of liberation. Never before have I felt as free as I knew I had untied those invisible chains. The love I had been looking for on the outside turned out to have always been inside me. He told the student about the Buddha's teachings, that if you truly love yourself, you will not hurt yourself with negative thoughts or actions. This is the focus of our discovery, he said. Much of our suffering stems from the mistaken belief that love and acceptance must be won through external achievement. But loving yourself is not a reward to be earned, but an innate right, a natural truth given to every human being just because we exist. The master looked directly into the student's eyes. His gaze seemed to illuminate the deepest hidden corners of the boy's soul. From childhood, we learn that love must be earned through good behavior, through pleasing others. We treat ourselves based on how others treat us, often with harsh criticism and conditions. These patterns become so familiar that unconditional self-acceptance becomes alien and difficult. The culture around us continues to reinforce this by spreading the message that happiness must come from external sources. Every word, every action reminds me that I am not quite as complete as I am. He gently asked the student, "How often do you adjust yourself to be approved? Do you try to modify your true expression to please others? Is your value based on external feedback rather than internal recognition?" The disciple nodded, his eyes full of thought. When we love ourselves unconditionally, he continues, we create a solid foundation for inner fulfillment, which allows us to enjoy the affection of others without depending on it. We can accept praise with gratitude instead of desperate hunger, and face criticism without being destroyed by it, because our core values remain strong. Master gently quoted the Buddha's words, "You can search for a person throughout the universe who is more worthy of your love and attention than yourself, but that person does not exist anywhere. You are the only one who deserves your love." He looked up at the night sky, the starlight twinkling as a reminder of the immutability of the soul. This is not narcissism, but a deep awareness of the true nature of consciousness. In a moment of silence, the master asked, "Tonight, when you rest in this moment, do you feel the presence of reading these words? It's mind-aware awareness, witnessing your experience without being dominated by anything that happens. It remains the same, as pure as the vast space itself." He smiled gently. Treat that presence with the tenderness it deserves. Give yourself the patience you have for a child who is learning, or compassion as you would for a friend who is suffering. Master added, the Buddha taught that hatred cannot be appeased by hatred. Only non-hatred can bring true soothing. Self-criticism cannot be healed by more self-criticism. Only by learning to love ourselves, true to who we are today, can we create the inner conditions for true transformation. Finally, he concluded in a voice that was deep but full of light. When you discover that unconditional love within yourself, you will find the freedom you have always sought through the approval of others. It's always there, beating steadily in your heart, like the breath, like the heartbeat, like the immutable light in the darkness. The student looked at the master. His heart was filled with gratitude, and he felt a stream of life flowing through his heart. He realized that the journey was not about finding something far away out there, but about returning, discovering and loving himself in the present moment. He secretly promised to carry this teaching with him every step of the way, so that true freedom is no longer a vague thing, but the breath of life itself. The story begins on a misty morning in the Grand Cow Monastery, where rows of ancient wooden houses stand firm amidst majestic nature. Misty mountain peaks in the distance embrace a quiet space, where hundreds of monks gather every day to meditate and study. The sound of wind chimes gently echoes in the middle of the space, blending with the slow, rhythmic footsteps of the monks on the cobbled path leading to the main meditation hall. Under the first light of the new day, the dew drops on the leaves and flowers are like shimmering jewels, creating a picture of nature that blends with the stillness of the soul. True to long-standing tradition, monks gather before dawn to practice meditation, then dispersed to perform various tasks such as tending to the garden, cooking in the kitchen, copying scriptures, or maintaining the monastery's facilities. Every work is seen as a sacred part of the path of practice, each action being a means of leading the mind to deeper awareness. While everyone was busy with their work, the Venerable Abbot Chao Cho, a respected master with a calm but majestic expression, walked slowly through the grounds. His gait seemed to be fully immersed in each step. The sound of footsteps did not sound, but only felt like a gentle breath between heaven and earth. Every time he stopped, that piercing gaze seemed to probe the minds of the disciples. His presence is both tender and powerful, that makes everyone feel both comforted and deeply challenged. As he passed by the back of the main meditation hall, where the community gathers twice a day to meditate in silence, immersed in a state of enlightenment, he saw a young monk sitting alone in the shade of the wooden structure. The young man's sitting posture seemed attentive to practice, but he did not participate in scheduled general activities. The monk called softly, "Brother, where have all the virtuous people gone?" The question sounds simple, like everyday conversation, but those who are familiar with his teaching style will immediately recognize that this is an invitation to deep reflection. The young student looked up, his eyes confident, feeling that this was an opportunity to show his understanding of the Zen teachings. He replied seriously, "They have all gone to work," and then pointed to other areas of the monastery where fellow believers were enthusiastically doing their work. His voice is firm, showing the belief that true virtue lies in effective practice, in being active rather than idle. Chao just smiled softly, and then suddenly pulled out a sharp knife from his robe. The light of the blade flashed in the morning sun, startling the student. But what surprised him even more was when the abbot brought his neck towards the knife, let the blade touch the delicate flesh of his throat, and then quietly handed the knife to him. Chao's voice was still deep and gentle, as if this was a very normal request. "My responsibilities as an abbot are very big and strict. I wonder if you can help me cut off my head?" The student's eyes widened in astonishment, and his trembling hands gripped the blade in inexplicable bewilderment. It was the exact opposite of what he had understood about proper monastic behavior, spiritual teachings, or the minimum decency of a human being. All the contradictions overwhelmed him so that he could not deduce the true meaning behind the request. Panicked and scared, he dropped his knife and fled the meditation hall, off the grounds, leaving behind confusion and a rift in his soul. Meanwhile, Chao calmly picked up the knife, put it in his robe, and continued his morning meditation walk with a calm attitude, without the slightest wavering. As the Buddha once remarked, "It is better to travel than to arrive." This story opens up a profound lesson about the difference between pure wisdom and true enlightenment. Why do people often confuse conceptual knowledge with vivid insight? The thinking mind tends to collect ideas and organize them into neat concepts, creating an illusion of understanding that is not accompanied by profound spiritual transformation. The young monk's reaction, "They all went to work," reflected the dualistic way of thinking that separated spiritual practice from daily activity, as if the two states existed separately, opposites. He assumes that virtue lies in productive work, not meditative stillness, which in turn reveals a limited understanding of the spiritual path. But Chao's teachings go beyond superficial interpretation. By the act of putting his neck in front of the blade and handing the knife to the monk, he is challenging a profound question. If every virtuous person has gone to work, what is the most important job? What is the most sincere, compassionate response to suffering? This makes the monk and all of us look back at our own spiritual assumptions. How many times in our lives do we separate activities into sacred and mundane, important and ordinary, holy and ordinary? That dualistic mindset makes us miss the opportunities to awaken even in the most simple moments. Abbot Keao's gesture is a testament to the deep Zen spirit. Compassion sometimes requires actions that go beyond ordinary thinking. When a person is suffering heavily under the burden of responsibility, clinging, or spiritual aspirations, the most loving response may not be patience or empty advice, but a root cut, a radical release from the constraints of the ego and the inherent concept of self. Zen master Lingji once taught, "If you meet the Buddha on the road, kill the Buddha." This famous quote contains the same profound teachings that Chao expressed. Every fixed idea of enlightenment, any attachment to a spiritual role or concept, is an obstacle to direct realization. True compassion can require us to destroy what we think needs to be protected, so that the light of enlightenment can shine fully. The young monk's fear and flight exposed the extent to which he was trapped in shallow understanding, seeing only the surface and unable to recognize the depth of the teachings. He was still trapped in literal understanding, unable to break through the shell of the words to accept the abbot's call for radical transformation. His knowledge, though obvious it may seem, is still just a concept separate from the actual act of awakening. We can look to ourselves to reflect on our relationship with spiritual responsibility and compassion for others. When someone comes to us for help because of suffering, are we willing to respond with insight or just give general advice? Do we have the courage to give up our safe place in spiritual concepts to meet others as they are, with all its authenticity and complexity? This ancient wisdom clarifies the difference between talking about virtue and actually demonstrating virtue. The young monk may point out where the moral people are working, but when truly challenged by the opportunity to express radical compassion, he runs away. His knowledge does not lead to enlightened action, but only to a discrete set of concepts. In the practice of meditation, we are encouraged to cultivate great doubt, the ability to question even our own deepest spiritual insights, not with negative skepticism, but with an openness to new discoveries beyond the confines of current concepts. Are we willing to let what we consider certain in the spiritual path be challenged, even destroyed, if it helps us to awaken? When we have the opportunity to help others in difficult moments, can we recognize the difference between providing what we think they need and responding from a place of genuine understanding? Can we recognize that true compassion can entail transcending our own comfortable assumptions of rightness and divinity? The Buddha once said, "In caring for others, you take care of yourself. When you take care of yourself, you care about others." Abbot Keao's offer to sacrifice his own life is not only a personal challenge, but also a symbol of this non-dualistic understanding. When we truly recognize the deep connection between ourselves and others, the boundaries between ourselves and outsiders, helpers and helpers, begin to blur, so that compassion becomes the most spontaneous and genuine act. The journey of discovery of spiritual awakening is not the attainment of divine achievements or titles, but the complete renunciation of all stubborn ego, all rigid ideas about oneself and the world in order to realize the absolute nature of the truth that exists right here, in every breath, in every ordinary moment of life. And it is in that moment, when we let go of all attachments, that we are truly free and enlightened. Let us continue our journey, always open to the profound lessons of the most simple experiences. And know that true awakening does not lie in a distant place, but in the true sight of what is present in this very present moment. The following story shows the difference between helping and clinging. This is the lesson of the two monks and the woman by the river. The two monks were walking together along a mountain road, going to a remote monastery, where they planned to continue their studies. Both were dedicated practitioners who took strict vows as part of their spiritual training, including a vow to avoid all physical contact with women. This did not stem from disrespect, but from their understanding that such discipline helped them focus on spiritual growth. As they approached a rising river where the usual bridge had been damaged by recent storms, they met a young woman standing uncertain at the water's edge. The current was strong and dangerous, full of debris from the mountain current, and she was clearly afraid to try to cross alone. "Please, venerable monks," she called to them, "can one of you help me get through these dangerous waters? I'm not strong enough to do it myself safely." One of the monks is immediately tense, his mind racing through their monastic rules and the potential intricacies of the situation. Physical contact with women is expressly prohibited, and he began to explain why they couldn't help. Perhaps suggestions for alternatives without having to break their vows. However, the other monk looked at the woman's predicament and the real danger she faced and made a different choice. Without hesitation or long-term consideration, he walked to her side and gently lifted her onto her shoulders. He carefully carried her through the dangerous current, ensuring her safety with every step, and gently placed her on the other bank. "Thank you very much," she said gratefully, bowing to both monks before continuing her path. The two monks continued their journey, but the atmosphere between them changed dramatically. The first monk walked in increasingly agitated silence, his mind whirling with thoughts of what he had witnessed. As the hours passed, the tension in his heart increased until he finally could no longer contain his suffering. "Brother," he popped up, unable to remain silent any longer, "I can't understand your behavior in the river. Our spiritual training clearly teaches us to avoid any physical contact with women. However, you've picked up the woman on your shoulders and carried her across the water. How can you violate our sacred oath so blatantly?" His companion looked at him with gentle surprise and responded in a completely simple way. "Brother, I put her down on the other side of the river a few hours ago, but you're still carrying her. The Buddha's wisdom teaches us to hold on to anger like grabbing a hot coal with the intention of throwing it at someone else. You are the one who gets burned." This story reveals the profound difference between acts of compassion and spiritual engagement, between meeting current needs and fulfilling past events. Why do we often carry situations with us so long after they're over, replay scenarios, and nurture grievances that exist only in our minds? Zen Buddhism reveals that much of our suffering does not come from what happens to us, but from our inability to release experiences once they have passed. The first monk's agitation shows that strict adherence to rules can sometimes contradict the spirit of compassion that inspired those rules in the first place. His fellow monk sees a person in danger and responds with immediate kindness, then completely releases the incident. But the first monk carried out the event for hours so that it became heavier step by step. Consider your own tendency to replay past conversations, nurture old grievances, or mentally rehearse situations that have ended. How much of your mental energy is spent carrying around situations that now exist only in memory? The woman crossed the river in a few minutes, but the monk carried her for hours through her own thoughts. This teaching applies not only to serious violations of the law. We carry with us harsh words that someone said years ago, mistakes we made decades ago, moments of embarrassment that no one else remembers. Meanwhile, the present moment, rich in possibilities and practical experiences, goes unnoticed because we are too busy carrying ghosts from the past. In the practice of Zen, we learn to distinguish between appropriate action and unnecessary attachment. The second monk helps when help is needed, then completely continues. He doesn't focus on whether he's making the right choice, worrying about other people's opinions, or repeating things incessantly in his mind. The Zen master taught, thanks to impermanence, everything is possible. The river crossing is impermanent. It begins, serves its purpose, and ends. Only the attachment of the first monk to this event allows it to exist continuously in the form of mental suffering. The Buddha said, let go of what is past. Let go of what may happen. Let go of what's happening now. Don't try to figure out anything. Don't try to make anything happen. Relax now and rest. This teaching only comes directly to the freedom that is available when we stop carrying experiences beyond their natural lifespan. Let's take a deep look at what you can carry unnecessarily. Old resentments, past failures, conversations that annoy you, decisions you regret. All of these things exist now only because you keep picking them up and carrying them. What does it feel like to put them down? The irony is profound. The monk who actually breaks the rule does not experience suffering about it, while the monk maintains perfect rule adherence that generates hours of agitation for himself. This suggests that suffering often does not come from our actions, but from our thoughts about our actions. Tonight, when you notice your mind returning to past events, old grievances, or situations that have ended, can you remember the example of the wise monk? Can you practice putting down whatever you've been carrying unnecessarily, discovering the lightness that comes from traveling through life without being burdened by yesterday's experiences? As the Buddha's wisdom reminds us, in the end, there are only three things that matter: how well we have lived, how well we have loved, how well we have learned to let go. True spiritual practice is not about following the perfect rule, but about responding appropriately to what is really present, then releasing it completely to make space for whatever happens next. Let's continue our journey with a story about the transformative power of fearlessness and unconditional compassion. This is the story of the thief and the Zen master. On a quiet evening, as the sunset adorns the sky with purple and gold, Zen master Shichiri Kojin sits in his simple home to chant ancient chants. His voice flowed smoothly through the peaceful rooms. Every word is a meditation. Every breath is a prayer. The soft light of candlelight dances on the walls as he is fully immersed in the sacred texts, finding deep tranquility in familiar verses. Suddenly, the serenity was broken. The front door opened with a violent crash, and a desperate man entered, swinging a sharp sword that gleamed menacingly under the candlelight. His eyes were wild with despair. His clothes were dirty and torn. His breath was heavy from running. Apparently, he chose this detached house because he believed it would be an easy target. A peaceful monk will not resist. Your money or your life? The thief demanded, his voice trembling with a mixture of fear and aggression. He expected the old man to cower, beg, frantically scramble for anything of value he might have hidden. But Shichiri didn't even look up from his classic book. His voice remained calm and steady as he continued to read for a while before pausing to speak to the intruder. "Please don't disturb my practice," he said in the same gentle tone he could use to ask someone to close the door. "If you need money, help yourself. It's in the drawer over there." He casually gestured towards a simple wooden chest, and then immediately returned to his reading as if nothing unusual had happened. The thief stood stiff, his sword still raised, completely bewildered. In all his years of stealing, he had never encountered such a reaction. No fear, no begging, no anger, just help in terms of action, as if he were a neighbor stopping by to borrow something. Shaking his head in confusion, but continuing his work, the thief moves to the designated drawer and begins to collect coins and small valuables that he finds there. The teacher's gentle voice continued to sound behind him, reading the sacred words peacefully, as if he were alone. Just as the thief was about to leave with his stolen items, the owner's voice called out again. "Wait," Shichiri said, finally looking up from his book. "Please don't take everything. I need some of that money to pay my taxes tomorrow. Leave a little for me, right?" The thief stared at him in amazement. This is a man who is being robbed, calmly negotiating the terms of his own robbery as if they were conducting normal business. Almost without thinking, the thief returned some money to the drawer. When he turned to leave, it was certain that this strange encounter was finally over. The master's voice stopped him once more. "You took my money," Shichiri called, his tone carrying a hint of reproach. "And you don't even thank me. That's pretty rude, don't you think?" This last remark left the thief completely speechless. His sword hand began to tremble. Never in his most violent encounters has he been so completely worried. This is a person who treats robbers as if it were a favor, who cares more about politeness than personal safety. "Thanks." The thief stammered and then fled into the night as fast as his legs could carry him. Later, when the thief was arrested and confessed to many crimes, including the incident at Shichiri's house, the owner was called as a witness. Court officials expected him to demand justice, to describe the terror and abuse he experienced. Instead, Shichiri spoke with the same apparent calmness he had shown that night. "This man didn't steal anything from me," he testified. "I gave him the money comfortably. He even thanked me for it, although it took a little reminder." The thief who was sitting in chains felt something break in his chest when he heard these words. This man not only showed extraordinary kindness to him at the time of the crime, but is now protecting him from the consequences. For the first time in years, his tears came out. Not tears of pity or anger, but tears of recognition. He encountered something he had never experienced before. Love is unconditional. After being released from prison, the former thief searched for his master and begged to become his student. Under Shichiri's patient guidance, he learned to cultivate the fearless compassion he witnessed that night. Years later, through dedicated practice and the master's firm belief in his transformational potential, he gained the deep peace and wisdom of enlightenment. As the Buddha observed, hatred does not end with hatred, but only with love. This is the eternal rule. What emerges from this story is the revolutionary power of confronting violence with absolute peace, responding to receiving by giving, and responding to fear with love. Why do we instinctively believe that force must be met with force, that aggression requires a defensive response? Zen Buddhism reveals that this paradigm, though natural, often perpetuates the very conflicts it seeks to resolve. When we respond to hostility with hostility, we simply escalate the cycle of suffering. But when we respond with true compassion, not passive submission, but active love, we create space for transformation that otherwise would not exist. Take a deep look at your own experience. When someone approaches you with anger, criticism, or demands, what is your automatic response? Most of us immediately mobilize defense, preparing to defend ourselves through a counterattack or retreat. But pay attention to what happens in your body and mind during these defensive responses. Does stress decrease or increase? Will the conflict be resolved or increased? Shichiri's answer embodies what Zen calls a skillful medium, acting from wisdom rather than reflection. His fearlessness did not come from a lack of awareness of danger, but from a deep understanding of the nature of reality. He realized that the thief's aggression came from despair and suffering, not from inherent evil. By refusing to see him as an enemy, Shichiri created the possibility for the thief to see himself differently. In the practice of Zen, we cultivate what might be called the courage of defenselessness. This does not mean being naive about the real danger or allowing oneself to be harmed unnecessarily. We often pass through life like a river that flows smoothly, but beneath that surface are deep vortices and challenges that we rarely dare to face. The story of the seeker and the hermit by the river shows that spiritual awakening is not a game or a hobby, but a burning commitment, a need as essential as breathing, that you can't live without it. When the young man was drowned by the hermit underwater, he experienced vivid truth. To come to awakening, you must be willing to face the death of the old self, with the dissolution of false security identities. It is not torment, but rebirth, a deep jump into the true flow of life, where everything changes and nothing can cling. And it is from the depth of this experience that self-knowledge can rise like a divine fire. But this journey is not easy, because we are used to living in the comfort and safety of long-programmed habits, patterns, and thoughts. We are afraid of losing ourselves, afraid that the chaos of the unconscious will sweep us away if we allow it to rise. The young seeker in the story has only just touched the surface of spiritual aspiration when he is still using curiosity as a lifeline, not yet brave enough to plunge deep into the cold and suffocating waters of inner truth. But it was in that moment of drowning that the narrow self was broken, giving way to a naked and awakened soul. Similarly, the story of the warrior imprisoned in a cold, dark room shows us the liberating power of focusing on the present. When confronted with extreme fear and traumatic prospects of the future, he realizes that it is all just a product of the mind, invisible ghosts woven from fantasy and anxiety. By holding his breath, listening to the wind, feeling the ground beneath him, the warrior finds peace in the present moment. This truth is not an evasion of responsibility, but an attitude of mindfulness so as not to be dragged by the mind in a whirlwind of anxiety and fear. Both stories offer a core lesson. Spiritual awakening requires intensity and holistic presence, a direct look into one's innermost self without fear or evasion. This can make us feel drowned in the depths of our souls, But it is also that drowning that opens a new dimension of life, a life that does not just pass over the surface, but is a life full of meaning, freedom, and awareness. In the modern age, it's easy to be tempted by commercial spiritual experiences or easy recipes, quick healings, or technical courses that don't really penetrate every cell of life. We want to have insurance for our inner growth without paying the price of real dedication. So many people stop at the level of curiosity and gather knowledge on the surface. But true awakening is not a technique, but a continuous process of dying and rebirth, where each time you let go of a part of your old self, you are one step closer to the truth of selflessness and absolute freedom. And this is the biggest challenge for each of us. Do you want God, truth, or spiritual awakening as much as you need air to breathe? Are you willing to let your ego die, to drown in the unknown and uncertainty, like the seeker being pushed underwater, like a warrior in a cell, and then rising as a whole new person? This path is not in the distant sky, but in each person's heart, in every breath and every moment of the present. When you truly live in this moment, you will find that peace and clarity are not something to be sought on the outside, but your natural state when you are not bound by the past or the future. Every time your mind arises with anxiety, you can return to your breath, to the authenticity of the present, to let go of meaningless stories and live every moment to the fullest. True awakening is an inner journey full of difficulty, but also full of beauty and vitality. It's not for the weak or just half-heartedly curious. It calls for a deep commitment, a life intensity as intense as the seeker wants air, and as the warrior needs life in the most dangerous moment. But the reward for this dedication is liberation, an authentic life that is not dominated by fear or suffering, a state from which you can touch eternity in every brief moment of this life. Therefore, when facing difficulties and challenges, when you feel like you are being pushed underwater or imprisoned in the invisible prisons of the mind, remember that it is an indispensable part of awakening. It is time for you to look deeply into yourself, accept and let go. And then, from the ashes of old prejudices, a new flame will ignite and guide you on the path, not of hopeless search, but of full realization and true freedom. That is the most valuable lesson that the river, the hermit, the seeker, the warrior, and even the Buddha want to impart to us, who are on a journey to find ourselves in the great sea of life. Under the morning sun, in the middle of dusty mountain roads with wildflowers peeking out from the rocks, a tired traveler stopped by the side of the road. On a smooth rock nearby, a shepherd sat quietly, his eyes on the flock of sheep grazing. The shepherd's face had a deep serenity, as if he had experienced so many seasons of rain and sunshine under this vast sky, learning lessons that only nature can teach. The traveler, sweat dripping down his forehead, walked up and greeted. "Good morning, friend. How does the weather look like today?" The shepherd looked up. His eyes were as clear as a mountain stream, and then smiled warmly. "The kind of weather I like." This simple answer made the traveler pause, confused, because he expected a specific forecast and accurate information to plan the day. "How do you know for sure it's going to be the kind of weather you like?" the traveler asked, his voice both curious and a little disappointed. The shepherd smiled deeply, pointing to the vast sky, where the clouds floated in the endless dance of the wind. "Sir, I have learned that I can't always get what I like, so I choose to like what I get. So I'm sure today will be my favorite weather." The traveler stood still, And that simple but profound sentence slowly seeped into his mind like a seed that found fertile land. This is not just a story about the weather, but a lesson in acceptance, about the art of deep contentment that life teaches those who listen. We, in our daily lives, often waste a lot of energy to control everything according to our will. We want the sun to be sunny on the big day. We want people to behave the way we want. We want the situation to be favorable so that we feel comfortable. But like the shepherd, perhaps what matters is not the external conditions, but how we receive and react to them. When we fight against reality, we create our own suffering. The shepherd's lesson is not passive resignation, but a deep awareness of the realization that resistance only adds to the burden on the soul. When we know how to go with the flow of life, whether it is rain or shine, we can still feel peace. That acceptance is like a cool breeze blowing through the mind, freeing us from the constraints of expectations and demands. The shepherd loves his flock, cares about each one, but his satisfaction does not depend on whether the flock has eaten enough fresh grass, or whether the weather is as beautiful as he would like. He may wish for a sunny day, but he doesn't resent it when it rains. He doesn't let the conditions out there determine the joy in his heart. The story raises an important question. Are we spending too much time resisting reality, wishing things were different, to be disappointed when things didn't go our way? How many times do we repeat in our minds stories about things that have not yet happened, things that we want, instead of living fully in the present moment? That tension and dissatisfaction is entirely our choice, and it's also where we can begin to change. Zen master Sangan once said, "The great path is not difficult for those who do not have hobbies." That does not mean that we have to give up all desires, but rather that we do not allow them to become shackles that force us to depend on and endure when they are not satisfied. We can still have hope, we can have goals, but we don't let our hearts be disturbed by uncontrollable changes. Take a deep look at yourself. Have you ever felt uncomfortable or frustrated just because of a small event that didn't go your way? Have you ever wished things had been different instead of accepting it? When we realize that it is just a natural reaction of the mind, we can begin to learn to let go of opposition and turn toward peace. The Buddha taught that attachment is not about love, but about letting our happiness and peace depend on external conditions. The shepherd cares about the flock, but his contentment is not tied to changes in nature or life. He knows that true happiness is an internal state, not something we seek externally. In the evening, when you sit back and reflect on the past day, you can see the good times and the difficult times. In those moments, try to identify the opposition or suffering in your heart. And then you can try to change your perspective, not waiting until things get better to be satisfied, but finding satisfaction in the present moment by transforming the way you see and receive. True happiness is not based on what you have or who you are, but on how you think about it. The shepherd taught us that valuable lesson through the serenity of nature and the small flock. When we stop demanding that life be our way, we find the freedom to enjoy every moment, whether it's sunny or rainy, whether it's success or failure. The art of contentment is not an easy path for everyone to take, but it is the path that leads to the greatest inner freedom. And like a shepherd sitting peacefully on a rock in the midst of nature, we can also sit still in our souls, immersing ourselves in the flow of life with deep acceptance and absolute serenity. So if you can, learn to love what you receive, even if it's not what you want, because that acceptance lies an infinite source of strength, the power to live fully, peacefully, and happily in the present moment. And that is the wisdom of the shepherd, a lesson in the art of living that we can all learn on the long road of our lives. In the faint light of the morning dawn, in the middle of a wild land in the mountains of Japan, an old general stood quietly beside his great army. The air was heavy and tense. The soldiers stood in a line, their eyes full of fear and doubt. The enemy was overwhelming in both numbers and strategic positions. According to all the usual rules of war, their upcoming battle will almost certainly be a defeat. The general, who had witnessed many bloody battles, did not let fear overwhelm his soul. On the contrary, he holds in his heart a strong belief that victory is still achievable. Maybe it's intuition, maybe it's the enduring hope of a person who is so used to adversity. He understood that the only thing that could change the situation was not the number of troops or the favorable terrain, but the morale and belief of the soldiers. However, the general clearly felt the collapse in the hearts of the soldiers. Their eyes were filled with doubt, and their pessimistic whispers were like a gloomy wave spreading rapidly through the ranks. He knew that an army that had surrendered in his heart would not be able to fight effectively, no matter how sophisticated the weapons were, no matter how numerically superior. The real strength, according to him, is the unshakable belief in victory. If soldiers believe they will win, they can do wonders. The next morning, when the mist was still hanging over the treetops, the general led his army through a small ancient temple hidden by the side of the road. The temple has witnessed generations of warriors stop to pray before facing life or death challenges. The general called everyone together, knelt down together, and prayed fervently, asking the gods to bless and protect the coming battle. When the prayers were over, he pulled out an old, faded coin from his pocket. He held the coin high so that all the soldiers could see it clearly. His voice sounded steadfast. "My brethren, we have prayed. We will now let fate reveal what the gods have destined for us. If the coin falls on our heads, we will win. If we fall to the tail, we will lose." The soldiers approached, their breathing shallow with nervousness. All eyes were on the coin as it tossed into the air, spinning in the faint light of the morning. The coin fell to the ground, lying still in the dust. The whole army burst into tears when they saw the coin on the head, a symbol of victory. Cheers echoed everywhere, bright smiles replacing the previous frightened confusion. Faith, like a flame that burns, lights up the heart of each person. The warriors who had been grim and frightened now embraced each other, eyes full of determination and hope. They know that the gods have blessed, and the victory is theirs. With that new spirit, the general's army advanced to the battlefield. They fight not only with physical skill and strength, but also with unshakable determination from within. Though his opponents were outnumbered, better equipped, his soldiers pulled off a legendary victory. A victory that has been recounted through the generations as a testament to the miraculous power of faith. After the battle, when the army was overjoyed, the lieutenant came to the general with astonished eyes. "General, the coin really reveals our fate, as you say. No human power can change what God has ordained." The general smiled, pulled out a coin from his pocket, and handed it to the lieutenant to take a closer look. "You're absolutely right," he said. "No one can change fate, if that's true fate." But then the lieutenant was startled to see that both sides of the coin were heads, meaning that the coin could never fall into the tail. This is the unexpected truth behind that test of faith. The general created a destiny through the power of faith and commitment. The Buddha once said, "Everything we are is due to what we think. The mind is everything. What we think, we become." The story of the general and the coin reveals a profound truth. Fate is not predetermined, but something we create through our own beliefs and expectations. Why is it so easy to believe that fate is out of control when it is our minds and attitudes that play a decisive role in shaping the outcome? Zen Buddhism teaches that although we cannot completely control external factors, we have great power to adjust our inner reactions and attitudes to all situations. The general understands human psychology and the nature of reality. He knew that the strength of faith and fighting spirit was what could change the game, surpassing all objective factors such as numbers or terrain. Faith creates energy. Determination gives rise to unprecedented strength in every human being. But the lesson is more profound than that. The general did not deceive the soldiers by playing tricks, but he created the conditions for their inner strength to be revealed. He fostered confidence, helping them connect with their own cause and abilities. Soldiers are already talented. As long as they are lit with the fire of faith, they can win all challenges. Take a look at your own life. Have you ever thought that the outcome is predetermined, that success or failure is something that cannot be changed? The general's double-ended coin is a symbol of the power we can all possess, the ability to drive positive results through commitment and belief in ourselves. This doesn't mean that just thinking positively will happen automatically. The warriors still have to fight. They have to try. They have to show real skill and courage. But the right belief creates a solid psychological foundation, helping them maximize their latent potential. In Zen practice, we learn to skillfully combine effort and letting go, between intention and acceptance. While we can't dictate a specific outcome, we can profoundly affect the energy and attention we give to any given situation. The quality of that interaction often determines success or failure, regardless of external factors. Zen master Hangpo once taught, "Foolish people reject what they see, not what they think. The wise reject what they think, not what they see." The general is wise when he realizes that soldiers' negative thinking about battle affects more profoundly than objective conditions such as troop numbers or terrain. He doesn't fight that fear, but works with it to create strength. Think about it in life. Have you had a failure mentality before? Do you often focus on obstacles rather than your abilities? Is fear determining how hard you try? And you need to create your own double-ended coin, a method or perspective that helps you stay actively engaged no matter the circumstances. The Buddha taught, "We are what we think. Everything we are arises from our thoughts. With our thoughts, we create the world." This is not a miracle, but an acknowledgement of the creative power of consciousness. When we approach challenges with confidence, clarity, and commitment, we often discover possibilities beyond imagination. The story of the general and the coin is not only a lesson in war, but also a testament to the power of faith in every aspect of life. That belief is not an illusion, but the power to turn difficulties into opportunities, to push ourselves beyond ourselves, and to write our own stories. As such, look at your challenges with the eyes of the general, not just as insurmountable obstacles, but as opportunities for faith and courage to be tested and affirmed. Create your own double-ended coin so that no matter what the outcome, you are always ready to embrace and fight with all your heart and strength. And then you will realize that it is your faith that shaped your destiny, as well as the general and his soldiers that made that legendary victory, a victory not only in battle, but also in the soul of every human being. Beneath the stillness of the night sky, as you sit back to reflect on the battles of your life, the difficulties, the challenges you are facing, and the results you are hoping to achieve, the story of the Japanese general and the magic coin seems to echo in your mind. Can you find a version of yourself in that wisdom? Can you create the inner conditions to support your highest abilities instead of letting your deepest fears control you? Can you realize that even though you can't have complete control over your fate, you still have a deep power in your beliefs and attitudes that determine how destiny unfolds in your life? These questions are not easy to answer, but we can start by listening to the teachings of the Buddha, who once said, "Thousands of candles can be lit from a single candle, and the lifespan of that candle will not be shortened." This means that happiness and confidence never diminish. Go when shared. And it was the confidence of the old general that ignited the fire of faith in the heart of each soldier, the fire that transformed a trembling army into resilient warriors, despite all difficulties. Sometimes, the most powerful thing we can do is not to change circumstances directly, but to create the conditions that allow ourselves and others to discover the power that has long been present in each person's soul. And the next story will lead us to a deeper truth. Liberation does not come from achieving something new, but from realizing what was never born and cannot die, the true nature of existence. In the tranquil garden of a Japanese monastery, where cherry blossoms fall gently in the spring breeze, a devoted disciple named Goshu approaches the wise Zen master Ueda. Over the years, Goshu has been practicing and meditating every day, reading all the ancient texts, practicing all the methods that his teacher taught, but he still feels that enlightenment seems very far away, forever unreachable. His heart was full of confusion and disappointment. Goshu bowed respectfully to the Zen master, his expression clearly showing the fatigue of someone who has searched for a long time without finding an answer. "Master, I have been studying meditation for many years, following all the instructions, sitting in meditation every day, reading books, following the teachings, but I am still not enlightened. I feel like at the beginning, still lost, not knowing what I'm missing. Please give me some instructions. What should I do next?" Zen Master Ueda looked at Goshu with eyes filled with compassion, and he understood that Goshu's great ambition to attain enlightenment had inadvertently become a burden that prevented him from seeing the freedom inherent in himself. Ueda replied simply, without a hint of mystery, "There are no tricks in meditation, Goshu. Enlightenment is just freedom from birth and death." Goshu frowned, confused. "How can you be free from birth and death, teacher? That sounds difficult. If you can't keep your mind still for a few minutes, how can you overcome life and death?" The Zen master's eyes lit up, and he said with an intensity that seemed to light a fire in the disciple's mind, "All your thoughts, all your fleeting emotions are birth and death." These words were like a veil of secrecy lifted in front of Goshu. He suddenly realized that the search for enlightenment was not about moving toward a future achievement, but about recognizing the real nature of the present experience. the constant flow of thoughts, feelings, and feelings. Goshu felt relieved to the core, as if he had laid down a burden he hadn't even realized he had been carrying all this time. All the long struggle to become something special gradually dissolves into the realization that he is not those fleeting thoughts and feelings, but the open space of awareness in which all experience appears and disappears. The Buddha once taught, form is emptiness, emptiness is form. This is the essence of freedom. Nothing is born, nothing actually dies. This story opens up a profound truth that we do not suffer because we lack something, but because we have never realized the freedom that is inherent in our nature. Why do we carry on our shoulders the burden of becoming spiritual or attaining a special state? Zen Buddhism points out that our false identification with the content of consciousness, the currents of thought, the feeling, is the source of suffering. We mistakenly think of ourselves as thoughts that pass through our heads, fleeting emotions, instead of recognizing ourselves as the vast awareness that contains all of them. Every thought is born and dies. Every emotion comes and goes like a cloud, and the continuous flow of birth and death is just the natural movement of life. When we identify with the flow, we have to endure the anxiety of constant change. But when we realize that we are the immutable awareness in it, we discover an unshakable peace. Zen master Hangpo once taught, "Your daily mind is the path." This emphasizes that enlightenment is not some magical or special state, but lies in our normal awareness of all states, from anxiety and suffering to peace and clarity. The Buddha also said that there is no distinction between east and west in the sky. The differences are only made by the mind, and then we believe it to be true. Likewise, the spiritual journey often creates problems by imagining that some states of consciousness are spiritual, while others are not. Try looking back at how you invest your energy in trying to have better thoughts, more peaceful emotions, or more pleasant experiences. Each of these attempts inadvertently reinforces the false belief that you are the content of consciousness, rather than the broader perception that sees everything. In Japanese Zen, there is a practice called just sitting, shikantaza, simply sitting there, aware of existence without wishing for or avoiding anything. It is sitting that is enlightenment, not a means to attain enlightenment. Tonight, when your thoughts arise and disappear in the cognitive space, can you recognize the birth and death that Zen Master Ueda pointed out? Can you see that you are not the thoughts that come and go, but the immutable perception in which they appear? As the Buddha taught, all things that are conditioned are impermanent. Salvation does not come from perfecting the conditional, but from realizing the unconditional awareness that is inherently within you. Let us continue the journey with a deeper understanding of the dangerous gap between conceptual understanding and actual life experience. Enlightenment is not something to learn, to attain, but to recognize and return to one's own being in the present moment with all the vicissitudes of life. Through these stories, from the Japanese general and the lucky coin to Goshu and the Zen master Ueda, we learn that true power lies not in controlling circumstances, but in how we understand and connect with ourselves. Our beliefs and attitudes create destiny. And the greatest freedom comes from recognizing that we are not the things that come and go, but the immutable cognitive space that contains it all. So tonight, as you face your own challenges, can you kindle the fire of faith in your heart, create the conditions for your true strength to shine through, and realize that the absolute freedom that has existed for so long has never been taken away. That is true enlightenment, a journey back to oneself, transcending all upheaval and suffering. Life, with all its complexity and transformation, is just a context for you to discover and live fully your true nature, endless awareness, peace, and absolute freedom. This is the story of the one-eyed monk and the silent debate that takes place in an ancient era of China, when monks wandered from monastery to monastery on a journey in search of teachings and challenged their own insights. In Zen Buddhist communities, there is a special custom that has been passed down through generations, a ritual that is not only intellectually challenging, but also a spiritual test so that a visiting monk can ask for an overnight stay in the monastery. The battle of the Dharma, as it is called, is not a duel, but a contest of intelligence, understanding of the teachings, where paradoxical questions and answers are conveyed through eyes, gestures, and silence, in order to reveal the depth of perception and wisdom of the participants. One afternoon, as darkness began to settle on the monastery grounds, tucked away among the green bamboo forests, a traveling monk entered, who had walked wearing straw sandals on winding mountain roads, his robes covered with dust and traces of his wandering days. Although tired, his gaze still exudes the sharp vigilance of a person seeking true enlightenment, a deeper understanding of the nature of life and himself. The abbot of the monastery, who was busy preparing the evening rituals, was unable to receive the guest monk in person because of his many things to worry about, so he entrusted the task to a loyal servant, a man in particular who had served the monastery for many years with a physical limitation that anyone could consider disadvantageous. He lost an eye in an accident when he was young. However, it was thanks to the clarity of mind and inner light that the other eye brought that he developed a deep and subtle understanding of the Buddha's teachings, a vision that many others must respect. When the two monks met in the monastery's formal reception hall, the visiting monk suggested an approach like no other. They would debate in complete silence, communicating only through gestures and symbols, as a way of showing that sometimes the deepest truths don't need words. The servant nodded in agreement, his eyes clearly showing curiosity and willingness to participate in the challenge. The guest monk begins by raising a finger aloft, symbolizing the Buddha, the enlightened teacher who showed us the path to light and freedom. The servant immediately responded with two fingers raised, representing the Buddha and the Dharma, that is, the teacher and his teachings. Seeing this, the guest monk was satisfied and went on to raise three fingers, symbolizing the three jewels, the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha, all three sacred treasures in Buddhism. But soon after, the servant surprised the guest monk with a very unusual gesture. He clenched his fist and held it firmly in mid-air, as if to signify a tight unity are inseparable between these three components. The monk's eyes slackened. His expression was confused, somewhat alarmed. After a long moment of silence, he bowed his head and left the hall, not continuing the debate. Immediately, he approached the abbot with respect, but obvious disappointment. "Sir, your representative is too lofty for me. I couldn't keep up with his understanding. I have to continue my journey instead of staying in the monastery overnight." The abbot raised his eyebrows, both surprised and excited, and asked him to recount the details of the exchange. The guest monk seriously explained, "I begin by holding up a finger, the symbol of the Buddha, who is enlightened and shows us the path. But the servant responded with two fingers, pointing to the Buddha and the Dharma, i.e., the master and the teaching. I continued with three fingers, symbolizing the complete three jewels, the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. But he clenched his fists, wanting to prove that those three things were a single unified entity. His knowledge is beyond my reach, so I have to find another place to learn more before I deserve to stay here. The abbot listened attentively, knowing the servant's personality and understanding, and suddenly the servant appeared in front of him, his face tense, his breath was heavy, and his other eyes lit up with indignation. Where is that traveler? I searched everywhere. I've never met anyone so rude, using the pretext of spiritual inquiry to humiliate others like that. The abbot was curious to ask what had happened between the two, because these were obviously two completely different interpretations of the same event. The servant began to recount in an indignant voice. He insulted me by holding up a finger, as if to say that I had only one eye. Can you imagine? I thought we were exchanging doctrine together, but he immediately emphasized my physical limitations. Although he tried to stay calm, he still had to hold up two fingers to admit that the other person had two eyes. I don't have any ill will towards him, just because of his thoughtless words. The servant paused to take a breath and continued, his voice growing more and more tense. But the traveler is not satisfied with that courtesy. He held up three fingers, as if to emphasize the total three eyes between us, making my physical differences impossible to ignore. I had endured enough, clenching my fists because I was going to hit him with persistent rudeness. But he saw it and ran away before I could teach him a lesson. The abbot stood still, deeply contemplating this strange thing. The same event, but two different interpretations, two completely different realities. The Buddha once taught that we don't see the world as it is, but as we are. This truth is clearly revealed through the story of these two monks, each of whom sees the same series of gestures through their own separate lenses. Why do we so often project personal worries, insecurities, assumptions, and emotions into neutral situations? Zen Buddhism calls them the 8 worldly winds: praise, disdain, sorrow, gain, fame, and disgrace. These psychological forces create internal transformations that profoundly affect the way we perceive the outside world. The servant's sensitivity to disability created a filter that made every gesture of the traveler interpreted as a personal attack. His past experiences of being judged or disparaged for appearance formed a solid explanatory framework, so much so that he was unable to recognize the other meanings that those gestures could carry. On the contrary, the guest monk's deep spiritual interest led him to see the profound teachings in the gestures that were actually expressions of growing anger and hurt. That leads to a deeper question for ourselves. How many times in our lives have we misinterpreted situations just because of current worries, past traumas, or persistent hopes? Maybe someone's distracting behavior is interpreted as disliking us, when in reality, they are only concerned about the health of their loved ones. Maybe a sincere suggestion becomes a criticism in our minds because of our lack of confidence. The ancient wisdom in this story shows how each person's inner state creates the outer experience. Both monks are sincere in their perceptions, but both are fundamentally wrong about reality. They don't lie or deliberately misunderstand. They just see the world through the lens of their own personal psychology. This teaches us an important lesson: how to develop the ability to see things more clearly without being colored by subjective concerns and interpretations. Zen Buddhism offers two main methods to face this challenge. The first is to keep an unknown mind, to always be open to a variety of possibilities of explanation, not to rush to affirm or negate based on existing beliefs or fears. When someone behaves in a way that excites us, can we stop, observe, and question what other explanation is more appropriate? The second is mindfulness of one's own emotional state, recognizing the inner reactions, hurts, or hopes that color the way we perceive. In the story, if the servant can recognize the sensitivity of appearance that is shaping his perception, he can avoid misunderstandings. The visiting monk, if he observes his eagerness and search for teachings so profound that he can delusion false wisdom, can also avoid this failed argument. The Zen master once taught, "Your daily mind is the path." This teaching reminds us that it is not external things, but inner awareness that is the key to enlightenment. The Buddha also taught, hatred can never be appeased by hatred in this world. Only by not holding grudges can hatred be appeased. This is an eternal law. If the servant responds to the traveler's cognitive insult with curiosity rather than defensiveness, and the traveler questions his assumptions instead of jumping to conclusions, the encounter can become a valuable lesson for both. And now, as you look back at the conversations and experiences of the day, you may wonder, are your own sensitivities and concerns shaping the way you understand the world? Can you distinguish between what actually happened and the meanings that your mind adds to itself? The Buddha once said, "Peace comes from within. Don't look for it outside." When we understand that our inner state is like the weather within us, creating storms or peace in the outer world, we will discover the ability to see clearly in the service of both wisdom and compassion. And the story of the one-eyed monk continues, unlocking profound lessons about the choice, responsibility, and power that each of us holds in each moment. But it will be a different story, a new journey, like the young man and the bird that the ancients once told. He believes that the old boss is simply telling riddles to appear insightful, and he decides to devise a test to expose what he believes to be pretense. After thinking for a few days, the young man formed what he thought was the perfect trap. One morning, the boy caught a small sparrow in the garden. The little bird trembled in his clenched hands, its heart beating fast as if it wanted to escape from his arms. He carefully hid it behind his back, and then approached the old master, who was sitting peacefully in the morning sun, his hand holding the pages of an ancient book, his face shining with unshakable calmness. "Master," the boy exclaimed, his eyes shining with excitement and a hint of smugness, "I have a question that will test your legendary wisdom." The teacher looked up. His eyes were gentle and patient. He had met many young students with such rebellious ideas and challenged authority over the years. He understands that this is part of the process of growing up, a necessary step to assert yourself. "Please, ask," he replied softly, without sounding annoyed or angry. The boy approached, hiding the bird behind his back, his heart full of confidence. "Master, I hold a small bird in my hand. Use your great wisdom to tell me, is this bird alive or dead?" This question was like an impossible challenge that the boy thought would make it difficult for the old teacher. If he answered that he was alive, he would immediately strangle the bird to prove his mistake. If you say the bird is dead, you will let the bird fly away, proving that you don't know anything. Whatever the answer, he was confident that he would debunk the teacher's falsehood. He sat silently for a long time, not in a hurry to look at the boy's hand, nor did he ask for any other information. His eyes seemed to see through him, as if he understood something deeper than the trick he was attempting. Finally, with a gentle smile, filled with compassion and understanding, he said, "The answer, my son, is in your hands." The boy stood stiff, his mouth open, and his mind was surprised with a little confusion. That simple answer dissolved the entire complicated trap he had drawn. The teacher did not choose to answer in a binding way, but pointed out a profound truth. The boy himself is the one who holds the final decision. The young man looked down at his hand, still holding the bird behind his back, and felt its rapid heartbeat. At that moment, he realized that what the teacher said was true. The fate of the bird does not depend on the teacher's answers or wisdom, but is entirely in his hands. Not only that, but he began to understand that the power of choice is not only in this moment, but at all times in life. Life or death, creation or destruction, compassion or cruelty, it all depends on how he chooses to treat the world. Gently, the boy opened his hand. The little bird sat still for a moment as if feeling freedom, and then suddenly spread its wings and flew high, blending into the deep blue sky among the murmuring trees. The Buddha's wisdom taught that we are what we think. Everything we are arises from our thoughts. With our thoughts, we create the world. This ancient wisdom sheds light on the great responsibility that comes with conscious choice and the realization that we are the architects of our life experience. Why do we often look for answers outside through powerful figures instead of looking within ourselves? The most profound teaching is not the answers given, but the conscious exploration of each individual through life experience. The question that seemed to test the wisdom of the teacher was actually a question of the boy's own strength. He was so focused on proving the teacher wrong that he almost ignored the truth. Every moment gives us the choice to decide not only our current situation, but also our destiny and who we become. Look back at everyday decisions, big or small. Do you often wait for others to tell you which is the right choice? Do you often seek permission or guidance instead of taking responsibility yourself? The bird in the boy's hand represents all the power we hold that we sometimes don't realize. In our relationships, careers, and spiritual growth paths, we are constantly faced with moments where we hold something precious in our hands: the happiness of others, our own integrity, the opportunity to grow or destroy. The result does not depend on external circumstances or the wisdom of others, but on how we use the power we have. The teacher's answer reveals a truth about true teaching. Real teachers don't give answers. They help us realize the wisdom in ourselves, the power we possess, instead of making us dependent on them. Zen master Charlotte Juko Beck once said, "We always have a choice, even when it seems that we don't have one." The bird in the student's hand symbolizes the moments when we mistakenly believe that we have no choice, no power or responsibility. But awareness is always associated with choice, and choice always comes with responsibility. Take a look at your current challenge. Are you waiting for someone else for an answer or solution? What if you realized that the power to shape the outcome was in your hands? While you can't control all external circumstances, you always have the right to choose how to react. The Buddha taught, the mind is everything. Whatever you think, you become that person. Every thought, intention, and action is like a student choosing life or death for the bird. Every moment is an opportunity to create life or death, beauty or suffering, wisdom or ignorance? The answer is always in our hands. Tonight, as you consider situations in your life where you seek guidance or feel helpless, can you sense the truth the teacher points out? Can you realize the weight of the choice you carry with you every day? It is not a burden, but the dignity of conscious existence. As the Buddha said, no one saves us but ourselves. We have to walk our own path. The bird flies freely, not because of the teacher's wisdom, but because of the student's choice. When we realize the power of choosing life over death, compassion instead of cruelty, truth instead of lies, we discover that the answers to all the important questions are always in our hands. And now, let's move on to another story about the courage to believe in the flow of life. At the bottom of a crystal clear river like mountain air, where water flows through rock crevices with a gentle murmur, there is a village of tiny creatures. The river is like the breath of the whole world, carrying the wisdom of distant springs and oceans. Young and old, rich and poor, all live clinging to the bottom of the sand, wrapping their tiny trunks around branches and roots. They have learned to cling for generations, believing that it is the way to sustain life. Stick to the bottom, the elders used to say. The flow is dangerous. It will sweep you to unknown places. Safety is where you stand. But a tiny creature began to grow tired of that relentless clinging. Day after day, he watched the water flow overhead, watching how it moved with purpose and grace like a mystical dance. While those around him complained about the effort to maintain that grip, he wondered what it would feel like to trust the flowing waters. "I'm tired of clinging," he said one morning. "Even though I don't know where I'm going, I believe the current knows the destination. I'm going to let go, let it take me where I want to go. I'm afraid that if I keep clinging, I'll die of boredom before I can really live." The other creatures gasped in horror. "Stupid! If you let go, you will be beaten to death by the water before you die of boredom." But he decided. Looking at his neighbors one last time, he dropped the familiar stone, and immediately the water swept him away. As expected, he was thrown across the riverbed, smashing into each of the hard rocks. The pain that he had never experienced when he held on had hit. But strange things began to happen. When he did not resist, did not find a new anchor despite the pain, the water began to lift him from the dangerous depths. The crash stopped. The rocks no longer touch him. He becomes part of the flow, immersed in its fluid movement. As they traveled downstream, distant creatures witnessed the unprecedented. A person like them was hovering in the water with the power and grace of the river. They shouted, calling him the Messiah, the Savior who came to save them from the clinging life. He heard their voices and took pity on the misunderstanding. "I'm no more Messiah than anyone," he called back. "The river will lift us all free if we dare to let go." The real job is not to hold on to the bottom, but to embrace this journey, the great adventure of faith and flow. But the other creatures still squeeze the rocks and roots, refusing to let go. They weave the legend of the great Savior who has come and gone, not understanding that true freedom can only come when we have the courage to let go. The Buddha's wisdom reminds us, you only lose what you cling to. This profound paradox lies at the heart of the human experience. We spend our lives searching for safety and control, believing that by holding on to the familiar, we will live safely. But it is this clinging that creates the suffering we want to avoid. Why do I cling like that? Zen Buddhism points out that since childhood we have learned that what is familiar is safe, what is unknown is dangerous. This condition becomes a spiritual barrier when it prevents us from growing beyond the old limits. We also have the illusion of control, thinking that holding on to circumstances, relationships, and identities will prevent natural change. This creates tremendous tension because we are confronted with a reality that is constantly moving. Life is a constant flow, and when we resist, we are exhausted in a hopeless battle with forces stronger than ourselves. Look at the areas you're clinging to. A relationship has changed, your career is unhappy, your self-image is limiting your growth. The flow of change will flow whether we want it or not. Our choice is to exhaust ourselves of resisting or discovering grace in conscious surrender. The Buddha said, "Nothing is permanent but change. Water does not fight against the ridge, it finds its way down naturally." When we learn to go with the flow instead of resisting, we realize the efficacy and ease that rigidity can't bring. Tonight, when you rest in a moment of stillness, what might you be willing to let go? Maybe it's worrying about tomorrow, resentment from yesterday's disappointment, or shrinking self-image. Do you feel the flow of the present moment? Trust its direction. The Buddha taught, let go of what has passed, what can happen, what is happening now. Relax and rest in that belief, and you will discover that the flow you once feared would destroy you is actually the power that brings you back to your true nature. Tonight, at the end of your time together, do you feel the peace that doesn't come from the outside, but something you simply remember to have been there? The profound stillness you experience is not only in the teachings, but also latent in your awareness, waiting patiently for you to realize it. The Buddha reminded, we become what we think. As you reflect, realize that serenity and wisdom don't need perfect conditions or extraordinary experiences. They naturally flow from your soul, ready for any moment you choose to turn inward. Each of tonight's stories contains the same message. Our struggle is lighter when we stop fighting hard. True freedom comes when we learn to take things lightly. Lasting stillness occurs when we see through mental habits and automatic reactions. Even when your mind wanders into the future, when life seems overwhelming, tonight's insights are already rooted in you, ready to stand firm when needed. When you return to the outside world, take this awareness with you. Let it be a comforting companion and guide through all trials. That peace is not fragile, not fleeting, but as natural as breath and reliable as your own existence. You are not learning anything new tonight, but only remembering a profound truth. Thank you for accompanying us on this journey. Sleep well.